All right, let's call this meeting to order, and it being September 11th, I'd ask for a moment of silence in memory of the events of September 11th. Thank you. Would everyone rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Secretary, call the roll.
Commissioner Leo Molitor.
Here.
Commissioner Nora Idukas. Here. Chair Bill Bartels.
Here.
Vice Chair Richard Rodriguez.
Here. Come now to a time set aside for public comments. This is a time set aside for comments by citizens on matters not appearing on the agenda. I have no cards. Moving on. LC 08001 and LC 08003, LC 08009, various applicants. Andrea.
Good morning. I'm Andrea Osdy. Usually we have a problem with me and this microphone, so let me know if you can't hear me. As you just mentioned, we have 8 different contract proposals coming in this year, 2008 Land Conservation Act proposals. To give you a brief background, I know you're used to this. You see this once a year, but you only see it once a year. So I wanted to give you a brief background, just to remind you what the LCA program is all about. In 1965, the state introduced the Williamson Act, and it was intended to reduce property taxes for landowners who kept their land in open space and agriculture. And the benefit to the county for this and the state was that land would be kept from being rezoned and developed into smaller size parcels that would be developed for residential or anything more intense than agriculture. In 1969, the county adopted its first set of guidelines and began implementing the program. So we've had that for quite a while now. The tax reduction calculation is determined by the county assessor's office, and this depends on a number of factors, including the time on the contract. There are 10 and 20-year contracts, so of course the 20-year contracts get a greater tax reduction than the 10-year contracts, and also the amount of land that's in agriculture, the type of land that's in ag. The reason I'm focusing on just agriculture is because, or just crop production, is because we don't have any grazing contracts that are being proposed this year or wildlife contracts. Everything is focused today on crop production. And also the proximity to a city also determines what the tax reduction would be. The range is from about 10% to 35%. The contracts self-renew every single year. So once a person has entered into a contract, they don't need to do anything. They are in the contract indefinitely unless they decide to file a notice of non-renewal. So the only reason the 10 or the 20-year contract becomes important is if they decide to non-renew. In that case, there'd be 10 or 20 years left on the contract. And every year, we provide you with a map that shows what the contracts are that are coming out within the next 5 years and next 10 years. Because there's a filing deadline, it's October 1st for the notices of non-renewal. That deadline hasn't passed yet, so we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, and we don't have that map ready for you, but I will provide that to you as soon as it's available. And no contract or no notices of non-renewal have been proposed yet for this year. All of the 2008 proposals are for crop production, as I mentioned. Eligibility, there are a number of factors there too, what the criteria are, but the main ones are that the lots need to be legal, and also that a certain amount needs to be in production. For lots larger than 40 acres, it's 50%, and anything less than 40 acres, there's a larger percentage that needs to be in. And also the crops need to have produced an income of $500 per acre per year of 3 of the last 5 years. There are 2 different categories that we use when we're processing the LCA contracts. There are the new contracts, so that's parcels that are currently unrestricted by LCAs, and also the rescission reentries. And those typically come in when somebody proposes a subdivision, because what we need to do is make sure that each of the resulting parcels would be on its own, independently eligible to be in a contract. If those parcels are sold off later, then that property owner needs to have that assurance that, or we need to have the insurance that that land on its own is eligible and should have an LCA contract. And also that it helps us because then we're able to make sure that the property and the contract boundaries match, makes it a lot easier for processing and reviewing discretionary projects, etc. The subvention report is something that we prepare also following the notice of non-renewal deadline on October 1st. And what that does, the subvention is provided by the state. It's money that we get, the county gets, in exchange for running this program. It's like a partial compensation for the money that is lost, the revenue that the county does not receive because of the reduced rate property taxes. The assessor provides us with the number of contracts that are currently in existence and also the number of acres that we have under contract. We use that information and we come up with the subvention report and provide that to you. So again, I'll give that to you after October 1st when it's ready to go. The 2008 proposals, you have the full thick packet there. It's exhibits 2 and 3 that describe each of the proposals. We have 5 new contracts that are proposed to come in and also rescission re-entries that will result in 27 new contracts. 5 of the contracts are 20 years and each of the other 27 are 10-year contracts. There are contingencies for every single one of the proposals this year. And in order for the contracts to be recorded before the end of the year, each of those contingencies needs to be met. So the subdivision needs to be approved and all prior recordation conditions need to have been satisfied before the contracts can be recorded. There are a couple of zone changes you may have noticed in there, and those are for 2 of the Lloyd Butler subdivisions. And I'm not processing the zone changes because they are in conjunction with the subdivisions that are being processed by other planners. So we can go over the zone changes if you're interested, but it's important to note that those zone changes or that the contracts will not be recorded until the zone change and subdivisions are approved and ready to record. Each of the proposals has an alphabetical letter, probably noticed, but there's one that's missing, item B. That project was withdrawn because the applicant realized, or we realized too, that there was an illegal lot. It was a subdivision that had occurred inadvertently, and it had to do with a water sharing agreement where a portion of they decided to split ownership of the water source, and that created an illegal subdivision. In order to remedy that, they would have needed to come in for a voluntary merger, and they weren't prepared to do that this year. So they may come in the future. We're adding approximately 300 acres to the LCA program this year, which would bring the total to about 130,000 acres in the county. And also the number of contracts will be brought to over 1,000 with these new contracts. On August 27th, we visited the Ag Policy Advisory Committee, and they recommended approval to the Commission and to the Board of all of the 32 contracts per our recommendation as well. The Board of Supervisors hearing is scheduled for November 11th, and your recommendations today will be brought forward to them. You'll see the findings in the report, in the staff report. So we're showing that each of the contracts complies with the State Williamson Act, the County LCA guidelines, the General Plan, Non-Coastal Zoning Ordinance, and the Coastal Zoning Ordinance, because we do have one proposal that is in the coastal zone. The public notice was published in the Ventura County Star, neighbors within 300 feet, and also planning directors of cities where the project is within 1 mile of the city, and we only had one case of that happening. I received no letters, and I received one phone call. Somebody was concerned. He thought that there was a major subdivision where hundreds of housing units were coming in, and I reassured him that wasn't the case. He was very glad to know that that was not going to be happening. The recommended actions, take a look at page 11 of the staff report. There are a couple errors that I need to correct here. One of them is that the final action is 10, should be 8. There's just a numerical problem here. And also that the new contracts, I did not mention in there that there are contingencies attached. So we're going to need to modify numbers 5.
It's page 13.
It's on page 13 of your
our-
book, but 11 of the staff report itself. So I'm going to need to modify actions 5 and 6 to include the contingencies, so those should read exactly the way the last two actions are. So we're recommending that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending that the Board of Supervisors find that the LCA contracts are categorically exempt from CEQA and adopt the findings for all the contracts listed in the staff report and approve the new contracts and the rescission reentry contracts with the contingencies listed in the staff report. Let me know if you have any questions. That concludes the presentation.
Yes, Commissioner Molitor.
Mr. Chair, Andrea, I have a question. It's more or less of a hypothetical. If you look on page 5, under all those bullets, the paragraph that starts in simple terms. Let me see, is that? Excuse me a second. Let me 10 acres. I'm sorry. I'm on page 4. Go to page 5. The second full paragraph. It says something about a 10-acre plot.
You're looking at page 5 of the
Which
staff
page?
report?
I'm trying to find out. I'm sorry. I've kind of lost my place. There's something that said, yeah, 9-acre minimum.
It's on page 5 of the staff report, page 3 of 12.
Okay. My question is
2006
this.
Guidelines, that paragraph?
Yeah, it's something about 9 acres and minimum size. Okay. I have a piece of land that's 10 acres. I'd put a house on it on less than an acre, and I've got more than 9 acres left, and I plant trees. Now, there's something in here on a condition that if you're planting something that hasn't produced yet, you can still claim the exemption. And could I, in theory, with a 10-acre plot with a lot, plant a bunch of lemon trees, and if I could justify that in the future they would produce $500 per acre, could I fall under the Williamson Act?
Yes, because you're proposing that these plants, they're non-fruit bearing, but they're expected to produce. So yes, you would be eligible.
Okay, so even if I have just 10 acres and I build a house on it, I can plant trees and I can get into the Williamson Act.
If you meet the minimum percentage also.
Okay.
So for a 10-acre lot, that would be a very large percentage.
Okay, that was my question. I wasn't aware that that was possible, and I don't know if an acre of lemon trees would produce $500, but I guess that's something I would have to justify later.
Yes, you would have to justify that if you applied.
I could speak to that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Since I have an 11.22 acre piece that's been in the Williamson Act for years and years and years and years. So, yeah. You could do okay if lemons were doing okay.
It's nice to have your experience on the commission. Thank you, Commissioner.
Any other questions? No?
All right. Go ahead and open the public hearing. Disclosure.
I don't have a 10-acre lot.
Mine came from sweat equity. All right. I have no speaker cards. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this item? Staff rebuttal. Close the public hearing. Commission?
I move to accept the recommendations of the Planning Department
With the
with the changes that were made.
All right. Is there a second? A motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Moving on to appeal number AP 07005. Nancy.
Good morning, Commissioners. Nancy Francis of the Planning Division here with this item. Just wanted to say on a lighter note, in remembering the events of 9/11, 9/11/2001 was my 30th wedding anniversary. So today is my anniversary, too. Somehow I now share that date with an infamous event. Today I am here with an appeal of a planning, all right, find my spot. An appeal of a planning director's interpretation and application of the definition of building height in two particular coastal zones. I think what this appeal comes down to is a line from one of my favorite movies, Cool Hand Luke, is a failure to communicate. And where we're having trouble with our communicating is grown out of several actions that have happened over the last few years, and in fact, actions, particularly one that involved your commission back in 2004. And the grounds for the appellant's appeal have been listed, but before we get into the discussion of those, I would like to provide a little background for you. You may recall, first of all, I will show you a site. I've not used this one before, but we're going to get the screen up. A particular case has prompted the question, but the question is a much larger one and applies to, frankly, the entire zone, and has come up in other cases. So, but the instant situation is here on Ocean Drive and has to do with an oceanfront house. So that will give you just a frame of reference. Now, back in 2004, your Planning Commission reviewed an appeal of another coastal oceanfront house on Ocean Drive. And in that case, there was significant discussion about the design of the structure and whether or not the design of the structure met the provisions of the code. Maybe I'll start by just saying in Exhibit 7 in your packet is the language from the code that talks about the height regulations in the coast. And what it tells us is that you have to measure from a datum point. The datum point is set in a couple of different ways, but once you have your datum point, you then take your measurements from there. And specifically at the time that we did the appeal in 2004, your commission was particularly interested in item B, where it says, no portion of a pitched or hip roof may protrude beyond the imaginary lines connecting the main ridge line with the tops of two exterior finished walls running parallel to the main ridge line. It's a little bit complicated, but what we had in that case was, this isn't going to continue, okay, a situation where we had not a pitched roof, not a hip roof, and not a flat roof. It was one of this slightly barrel design. And in that case, we had a wall 25 feet, and then over on this side, it went all the way up to 28 feet, which, as it says in here, is the maximum height that you can possibly get if you include some other features like roof structures and whatnot. And so at that time, your commission said, the language of the code says that that you can't have your walls are finished taller than a finished height of 25 feet. And in this case, what the barrel roof provided was this additional 3 feet of volume to the structure, which then did allow for rooms on the second floor or third floor to have more area. And so at that time, your commission said, no, the codes, you may not have this additional volume. that the code does not provide for that. The code says that the finished outside walls cannot be taller than 25 feet. Therefore, you need to have, this is where it gets tricky, a ceiling or a roof. And frankly, the term ceiling is the crux of this entire really appeal as it came out. Because, and in the case of the appeal on PD 2004, what the applicant ultimately did to satisfy your commission was to place a, you can call a roof, call it a ceiling, below, and then turn this modified barrel into a parapet, such that it was not the entire length of the house, but it acted as a parapet. So there was no usable space in this area. This area was essentially a wide parapet, and there was a ceiling, but not really a roof, at this juncture. The roof was here, the ceiling was here, no additional usable volume was created. And as a result of your commission, and by the way, I offer these as exhibits 12 and 13, the then planning director, Chris Stevens, provided your commission with this drawing, which he created, essentially during the hearing that we held on that project. And he describes down below, within these areas, this 25-foot box, what you can do. No limitations, he says. In area B, this would be limited to the main ridge line. If you had a pitched roof, and pitched roof and all roof structures, vaulted ceilings below the main ridge line. So if you have a pitched roof, you get this additional usable area, and you can have your wall here. But the code only speaks to a hip or pitched roof. It doesn't speak to barrels, and it doesn't speak to other sorts of designs, which have evolved, quite frankly, since the code was originally adopted. And we have been making a continuing effort to state in the staff report to try to accommodate these modified uses as they come along. So ultimately, sort of in the case of the field before you, and then area C, that would be above 28 feet. That's limited to, weather vanes, chimneys, flagpoles, TV antennas, as it states there. And so in the case of the appeal to PD 2004, the barrel part of the structure was in this section between 25 and 28 feet, where a parapet wall is okay, but you could not create additional sort of volume or usable space for the structure. Following that hearing, the planning director took this drawing and put a cover memo on it, specifically directed sort of to planning staff. But as this had been a part of the public hearing, there was a rather unfortunate, just limited distribution to some members of the design and architectural community. And as we learned over time, it was the use in the memo of the planning director's term of ceiling when trying to describe the differences, between the barrel and the parapet that have brought us to the point where we are here today. And that memo is in your staff report, dated July 2004. And that memo has caused such confusion that ultimately the planning director in February of this year wrote a memo trying to clarify his memo from July 2004 to say that it was not his intention to make a distinction between ceiling and roof, and in fact nowhere in the coastal zoning ordinance, if you search, is the word ceiling used, ever. It only speaks to roofs. And that is what his intention was, but as you saw in the example of the appeal from 2004, it gets more interesting when you're trying to show the distinction if you have, say, a parapet on top, such as was shown in that example, and a space, which was actually became the parapet wall, but certainly looks from all outside appearances as though it were part of the structure. And in fact, I have, this is what the house subject to the appeal looked like. And these, if you go to here, this is 28 feet, and then the required building height is shown here at 25 feet. And what your commission ultimately required was that a impermeable structure, a ceiling or roof, be placed at this 25 feet. So we, even in 2004, after the planning director's memo and after the hearing, there were still questions, because even at the time of your hearing, you may recall that we actually summoned down the counter manager and said, how have you been issuing permits for houses that showed this rather, vault barrel design? We have two types of permitting in the coast. Oceanfront houses, or houses between the first public road and the sea, require what's called a coastal plan development permit. And that is it's a discretionary permit that we have an opportunity to review, check and whatnot. But if you're inland of the first public road, you may receive a zoning clearance to build your house, just like anybody else in the rest of the county would. You meet the setbacks, you meet the height, you get all that stuff. You get a zoning clearance over the counter and go ahead and build your house. And in the cases where such designs had been shown in an area where a coastal PD permit was not required, what we learned was that, in fact, the counter was issuing zoning clearances that would accommodate the vault with, or the barrel with the additional space. And your commission said at that time, no, that's not the practice that we believe is consistent with the language of the code. And so, of course, now we have altered it, but we had, of course, issued some permits, as it turns out. It was an education for us, too, in those particular situations. So there was a rather uneven application of the code. And that is also, will come up as part of this discussion, too. So we moved along, and we thought we were doing all well. And in fact, starting in 2006, the Planning Division began trying to put together, we started with this one-page drawing and the one-page memo from the planning director. What we have now is a rather lengthy tome trying to more specifically address situations. And we have not finalized it yet because, frankly, we're waiting to see what your commission decides today on the request in front of us, because it will have an effect about how the code is finally finalized, or the memo is finalized. In the meantime, in preparation for getting to that, we have developed, I can zoom in here, they tell me, drawings that we intend to include that show the various types of roof designs and where we believe they would fall. I mean, you should see that the barrel roof we would expect would be at a 25-foot height, similarly to a mansard roof, and similarly to a geodesic dome, and even Quonset huts if we got down there. And I've also added that the datum point here would be the place that we're starting from zero. We've also drawn up some examples of what could be included above the 25 feet to the 28 feet. And as you see, they're largely pitched or hipped or gambrel roofs that can be done that way. In the interim, we continue to receive designs. We consider to receive interesting designs. And one of the design that specifically has prompted the appeal today is for a structure, when seen in cross-section, that looks like, specifically, we're kind of interested in this area of the plan. And if we were to be able to get this figure over here, says 28 feet. So we're showing, the design is showing 28 feet to the top of this skylight. And what has been indicated and what was highlighted in some of the other languages is that skylights may extend above the 25 feet into that area that we were talking about, the 3-foot area between 25 and 28 feet. It customarily and more commonly, you would see something like this, which is also labeled as a skylight. Sorry. You know, it comes above. It's not flush or come down into it. You have to have flashing and casing and all of that for the skylight. But in this design, what has been done is, in the opinion of the Planning Division, based on the previous direction that we received from the Planning Commission, believes that using this skylight to essentially create I guess here's the skylight, but using this portion to support a skylight that adds additional volume to the structure, and we would say it does in this case because it provides the required headroom necessary for steps leading up to a sliding door which leads out onto a roof deck. And hey, very much to the credit of coastal designers, pushing the edge of the development envelope has been a common practice. We have memos back to 1992 that we've included in your packet to show that we have continued to try to interpret and deal with new designs as they come along. The other interesting issue about this design is you'll notice that there has been a distinction essentially made between what is the ceiling and what is the roof, and applying two different height requirements to those two features has also changed the design somewhat, in that by saying, okay, I only have to have a ceiling at 25 feet, then all the structure that supports the roof can be above the ceiling, and then that puts the roof at a height maybe as much as 18 inches above the 25-foot ceiling. So the distinction between calling something a ceiling or a roof gets interesting. And one reason it took us a while, quite frankly, to grok to what was, the design that was being shown as the distinction between a ceiling and a roof, because customarily, and this is the cross-section of the structure that was the subject of the appeal back in 2004, what you have here is, the dimensions are all, sorry, I should look. I know, I have to go out wide. There we go. Thanks. What we have here is a height always showing to the top of the roof, the 28 feet. The required building height is shown to 25 feet. We haven't had plans where, even down at this level, a distinction would be made between 25 feet to the ceiling and then something else to the height of the structure. Always was sort of done that way until fairly recently, when we did begin to really appreciate that we were getting designs. Did I do something? Good. That we were getting designs that were including these distinctions in the height. And it may be... Now, in fact, the code does allow you to have a parapet wall up to 28 feet. And what has been proposed under the design that's under discussion right now does also include a parapet wall. So, this area that we're talking about, this area essentially over here, will not, which is, provide the additional height to be able to get onto the deck to have a little additional volume, will not be obvious beyond the height of the parapet. Everything is still within 28 feet. So, then the question might be, well, why do we care? We care because the language of the code, as interpreted by your commission, says that we should enforce the provision that says you got to have a roof. The height of the building is 25 feet, and the stuff above it is ancillary, skylights, elevator shafts, other kinds of stuff. And and that is why we are here today, is to, again, check with your commission about the way that the planning division has been applying the provisions of the code. Yes?
Hi. What is the purpose of that parapet wall? And could you point it out again?
Sure. Anything above the 25, let me see, put you down here. Anything above this 25 feet here, in the coast, this 3 feet area here, this is the parapet. And in the,
And what function?
oh, it's just a sort of an exterior wall around the top of the structure, because in the coast, many people like to have a roof deck, and in order to have a roof deck on top of it 25 feet, so you don't walk off the edge, the building code requires that you have, this parapet. And in some cases, they're solid. Some cases, they're glass. Some cases, they're bar fencing.
So does this, is that where a rooftop deck is, in addition to the one that they're accessing on the other end of the house?
I don't know, in this location, we would have to look at it more clearly, because we have the whole structure.
Could you pull out when you're,
Sure. One of my
could you pull, make it so that we see what you're pointing at?
Sure. Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I have to look at this. Okay. All right. So maybe looking back here, again, we have the 4 elevations. Let's see if I can get all 4. The 4 elevations of the proposed structure. Here we have a deck, that's looking out, and the glass railing looking out toward the ocean. This area up here, I don't know. I would have to get out the roof plans. The architect is also here. Certainly speak to it.
When it's done. When he's
No,
done. When she's done.
I didn't mean to imply that was a fourth roof deck. That there's the one that comes from this floor here. It's using 1, 2, 3.
Just everyone will get their chance.
Right here. But whether there's a roof deck in this portion, I will leave that to the architect to explain. I don't want to take the time to pull out the roof plan, but I'm sure he has it.
Okay, once something's approved, I mean, if somebody wanted to make it into a roof deck, they could.
They could if they had sufficient protection around it. If they actually did have a flat roof, like some of these examples that I was showing you previously, they would then have to add the structure that would provide the protection. And I'm talking about a 3-foot, because that's what the code allows, 25 feet plus 3 feet for, and sometimes what the parapet does is it hides the things like an elevator shaft, or like a peak, or flat skylight, or, others, the antennas, a satellite dish or something like that. So it does provide some screening as well as providing required protection for a roof deck. So there's a number of reasons to have, parapet walls, but they really aren't intended to increase the space of the house, or we would have, or the code would just say, take this 28-foot box and do whatever you want to within it. Instead it says you can do that at 25 feet, and only in special cases can you add some things above 25 feet. Be particularly stickler about if the building code just changed and you have to have 42 inches of protection now instead of just 36 inches of protection. Our code has not changed to accommodate it. I'm not sure that it will, but there are ways that railings inside of the parapet can be added to provide the protection to 42 inches, and people are dealing with that without...
With railings and stuff that doesn't add bulk. Also, I took a visit to the area and I noticed the other houses along the street. Do you know anything about, for example, the house that's, go back to your aerial?
I can tell you pretty much right now, no, I don't have specific information available to me right now.
Okay. If you put your hand, and go move it across the street and slightly to the right. Slightly to the right. There you go.
Yeah.
What can you tell me about that house? It's under construction right now.
What I can tell you about that house may not be a lot. public road parallel to the ocean. So it would have not gone through the same scrutiny as a house over here in terms of a plan development permit. If a plan was provided at the counter which showed that it met the setbacks and met the height requirements as we are currently interpreting them, the change having been made at the counter, then a zoning clearance would have been issued for this house and then a building permit, and no other discretionary action would be required for this house right here.
Okay. And I took note of other addresses that had barrel roofs. Do you know anything else about?
So some of them, I would have to know specifically, and that's certainly.
Well, I've got 3741, 3744, 3905.
We would have to research those for you if they're not the same as the list that the applicant provided to us. But we did research
Okay.
in terms of examples of where we've done. But we did acknowledge that there had been there had been a difference in the way the requirements were provided on either side of the street. In addition to that, even since 2004, there are a couple of permits that we acknowledge in the staff report. What we say is may have suffered from this language barrier as to the type of projects we were looking at. Planners are not accustomed to looking at the skeleton of the house and seeing the rafters and the double plates and all of these dimensions that have been included on some of these plans we've seen since 2004 to distinguish between ceilings and roofs. We're really interested in the overall, dimensions. Those construction details have become important to us only insofar as people have tried to call out a height for the ceiling different than the height for the ceiling for the roof.
And then from a planner's perspective, what's the legitimate purpose of the county being interested in the height of a building on the beach anyway?
Well, the legitimate interest, I think, is our legitimate interest, quite frankly, is having rules in place, making sure that those rules are applied consistently. Because one thing at the beach, inches matter at the beach. And we tried very hard to make sure that we accurately and appropriately and consistently apply the standards of the code to each dwelling. What this case, I think, demonstrates, in the case from 2004, is that it's a difficult thing to do given interpretation.
Would you say it also protects the views?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Protection of views is not a specific county charge. That's not our finding. We don't do that. But it's absolutely important to every single neighbor. So the views are certainly come up. But presumably the appropriate and correct application of the provisions of the code means that no one's view is more obscured than somebody else's because someone else was allowed to build higher.
That's all. Thank you.
Just as Commissioner Rodriguez has a series of pictures which we are going to enter into the record so that everyone has the same information. And perhaps, Robert, you can just, do we need to do anything special or just accept that and make sure it's stamped and make it available to the entire commission?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. Additional exhibits that Commissioner Rodriguez has?
Yeah, in the course of his investigation.
So this is an independent review of information? It's not in the package?
Right.
This information is not in my package. I did a site visit on all these addresses that were noted in staff's report and took pictures of what those locations were and jotted my notes down in reconciliation with the comments that are in the staff report.
I think that if you have that information and that copies can be made both to the staff as well as to the appellant, that they should have an opportunity to review that and then they can respond to your investigation as part of their presentations. Because it's not in the package.
Yeah.
And you'd have to then submit it as part of the package for purposes of future administrative record purposes.
It's fine.
Okay.
We will do that. So, what I'd like, just in terms of logistics, because this is an appeal,
Right. I have not finished my presentation.
Right.
Do you want me to
and-
do that first, or do you want to take?
No, I want to have you finish your presentation, then I want to take a short break while we get this stuff copied and people can see what we're talking about, and then we'll have the appellants.
Very good.
All right?
Okay. I will try to wrap it up. Because what I was going to discuss next were the grounds for the appeal. And that was a rather long discussion of background, but I think it is important to understand. So the appellant's grounds for his appeal begin on page 41 of your packet, the number 41, let's call it packet number 41 of that page 40. And actually begins on page 40 and then starts over onto page 41. If you would like, I can go through each one of these, but I do believe that the appellant's response, the first one has to do with the building height definition. Essentially what the appellant is asking is that previous interpretations of the zoning code, such as I mentioned with the bare roof and the added volume and whatnot, be the operative definer of building height in the code or interpreter, I should say, of the language in the code, so that the ability to add this additional area of volume would be the operative measure. And the appellant, I'm sure, will provide you plenty of documentation to support that. In the past, there have been examples where that has been done. It goes on then in the staff response to then begin to discuss some of this distinction between ceiling and roof. Then the grounds of appeal number 2 also discusses the same section that we were talking about, and the appellant specifically cites to top of wall as being the top of a double plate. Again, we don't have double plate discussions or definitions really in our code. So we have not used such things as double plates or, rafters or ceiling joists or that kind of information. It really is sort of beyond what the planning division is reviewing, other than we look to the top, is what we have said. The issue number 3 cites to Chris Stevens, the former planning director's original July 14th, 2004 memorandum, again, where he uses the term ceiling and also does include skylights in there. And I think that with the design that I showed you, that the applicant is putting forward with the skylight sort of integrated into that roof area on an angle, the applicant believes that skylights, I guess, any sort of design or shape should be allowed above the 28 feet, and even if they add increased volume, different from the skylight I showed you farther down the roof. And then we do provide our response, and we discuss the unfortunate use of the term ceiling when it should have probably been ceiling/roof, because in the case of the appeal in 2004, there really was more ceiling than a roof, but there was a horizontal surface, fixed horizontal surface at 25 feet required. And let's see, and it does describe that you may have those living areas below 28 feet only in the case of a pitched or hip roof. And at the time that the code was written, that was really what we were dealing with. We didn't have a lot of the more unusual and creative roof designs that we see today. Okay. I don't want to quote you from the report, the memo, because you have that in front of you. Incompleteness letter, Drake. This may be, I expect, one of the projects that may come. This particular designer that's making the appeal today did process a project through the planning division, which was the Drake project, with a very, very similar design to what is being appealed today. And at the time that we processed the project for Drake, we were still very much grappling with this this issue and this distinction about the ceiling and the roof and the distinction between the distance between the ceiling and the roof and what can go on there. And we did pass through the Drake project. That was very similar. But we weren't completely comfortable with it even at the time that we did it, although we were persuaded. And it was when the next design came in, virtually the same as the Drake design, that, and we sort of sensed that this was a trend. So we felt before we really got deeply into a trend, we ought to make sure that we were comfortable, the planning division, that we were accurately and appropriately applying the code similar to the direction that we had gotten in 2004. And ultimately we decided on this particular project, no, we really weren't. And it has prompted now the appeal for today, and then our correspondence is also included. As we said, even back in 2004, the planning director said, this is an ever-evolving issue given the magnitude of building designs. Please consider the memo something of a work in progress and subject to further and continued review. That was 2004. Frankly, we are still in the process of trying to do this, and what's going to happen today will probably help us significantly, frankly. Then the issue number 5 talks about is the projects that the appellant has listed that he said he believes falls into the area of projects that we have approved inconsistent with the 2004 memo. And of the 7 projects that were listed, we discovered that 3 of them actually had been approved prior to the 2004 memo, and that 2 were issued with zoning clearances, meaning they were not on the ocean side of the street. And then the 2 essentially are the ones that we believe have benefited from our confusion, the planning division's confusion created by the detail and the construction drawing. So we acknowledge 2 of those, and based on the lack of understanding, they were approved prior to the initiation again of this wholesale study, which we began actually 2 years ago. Then the last ground was specifically added relating to this particular project and the design of the particular project that we were looking at. And again, the planning division responded to that, feeling that the proposed access doorway did violate the code and therefore could not be permitted as determined by the planning director as she had done that. A more typical skylight, we say, which was not added in additional space, is shown in the same exhibit, and that was what I was showing you. So then the appellant's recommended action. Mostly what I did want to discuss were the 7 cases that had been presented and say that we did research them and did find that, in fact, 2 of them probably appropriately. It's very hard to tell when you look at a house from the street, as in the case of the appeal from 2004. This house still looks like this to the outside world. I mean, it does look like this to the outside world. What you don't see is that there is, this design is the same, is that there is now a ceiling at 25 feet, and this area up here is a parapet, essentially a false front, if you will. It does not include any additional habitable space. So it's often difficult just by driving down the street to necessarily, know exactly what it is that you're seeing. And with that, I would be happy to conclude my presentation and answer any questions.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes, that last drawing, if you put it back up, picture. That's the Saperstein residence.
Yes.
That was approved and appealed by neighbors that went to Coastal Commission,
Yes.
who found the plans violated the California Coastal Act, local zoning ordinance requirements.
No, it's not. They found that there was a substantial issue for appeal.
Correct.
And the project was appealed to the Coastal Commission. And as a result of the Coastal Commission's action, some additional conditions were placed on the Saperstein project. But the additional conditions did not address this design. There were landscaping conditions that were placed on the project, and a couple others that...
Excavation.
Yeah, some folks having issues, but they were rather, we believe that they were conditions that were already addressed
Yeah.
in the report, but not, the design was not altered. Except that to say that it had to, you know, as, this is the plan that was permitted and was reviewed. And this is not the plan, I mean, this is not the plan that was ultimately built because it doesn't show ceiling line in there as was required, nor does it show the sort of the parapet. But this was the project that was subject to review, which was altered, and the commission's action was then what was appealed. But the commission's action said, you gotta have...
This commission's actions.
Said, yeah, that was what went to the coastal commission, you gotta have the ceiling, it has to be parapet, you know, that can't go above this height, and that was what was on appeal, and that was not altered by any action of the coastal commission.
But it came back to the local planning commission for modification.
No.
Did not.
No. It came back to us only insofar as we had to say, I'm sorry, did it?
Actually,
did.
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But it wasn't regarding the roof.
Right.
It was regarding a balcony, because that thing was a...
Yeah.
I didn't, I'm sorry, come back to you, but I do know that the applicants had to agree to the imposition of the coastal commission's conditions, and the coastal commission's conditions were made a part of the permit.
And ultimately it was built, and the final word was that it was still built in violation.
There was
A letter issued in 2007.
There was a complaint issued, and ultimately, and I'll be happy to double check this building and safety, because it was a Customs building safety, determined that there was not a violation of the building code of the plan, but I would be happy to check this for you.
Yeah, I think planning. I think your name was mentioned as a CC on the documentation from the Coastal Commission.
So the complaint, an additional complaint to the...
No, of the disposition. A letter that was sent to Sapersteins.
Yeah, I get CCs on all the things
Yeah.
that establishing,
Okay.
but the complaint I believe that you were mentioning was a complaint, again, by a resident to our building department that the house was not being built
Right.
according to the plan.
Right.
And in my recollection, and I will be happy to check that, was that upon investigation by the building department determined that there was not a violation of the plans or building codes in general. The same complaint may have been made to the coastal commission, but, you're absolutely right, it was. And then I do have the letter that says that the coastal commission, in fact, coastal commission wrote us and said, there's no violation here. And I told the applicant, I said, I would like you to get that in writing. And the applicant did. So I do have a letter that says that the coastal commission determined that there was no violation. And I would be happy, I know exactly where it is, I would be happy to bring that to the court.
Okay.
If you want me to give us a break, I'd be happy to do that.
I may have missed this. Chair Bartels, through the chair, are you clear as to the decision that was made by the Planning Commission in 2004 on the Saperstein residence, because it has such an impact on how you're going to view this issue, and then how the Board of Supervisors on November 23rd, 2004 also took up that action and what they decided? Are you clear on those two decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think given that there's some complexity here that I want to lay out as a hearing, the appeal that we have before us is one issue. How we view that appeal may or may not be impacted by the machinations of the Saperstein appeal. I remember the Saperstein issue very well. So what I would like to do is get the Saperstein documentation and make it available to the commission and make it part of the record to the degree that's possible. And I'd also like to get these pictures admitted so that the appellant can choose to include or not include, or be ready to have some dialogue about that. And I'd like to take 15 minutes to make that all happen if that's possible.
I think I can do that.
Okay, so let's stand and take a 15-minute break, and we'll get copies of these and make sure everybody has what they need and get them logged in. All right? Thank you. All right, let's continue.
Thank you for the extra moment. Before I go on to how the Coastal Commission dealt with this Apple project, County Council has suggested that I ought to show you what your commission did and also what the board did with these on appeal.
Nancy, just a comment. Make sure you move back to the microphone. I was having county people sort of move in and go like this during the first part.
Gee, I thought it was such a booming voice.
Well, in here is fine. It's just it wasn't carrying necessarily upstairs.
Okay. If we could have the overhead. What this, when it comes up, is designed to show it is the resolution from your commission on the appeal when it was heard before your commission, and it goes through the whereases, and it does indicate that your commission denied the appeals, and there were actually like 8 appeals, and uphold the planning director decision and approve coastal plan development permit. That is the recommendation that went to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors then heard the matter on appeal, minutes by the board and their resolution, and if there's a heading for it, all the appellants, the board present, following persons are heard, the documents, and then the board held a public hearing. The board approves the attached staff recommendations. And so that was the action by the board. That is the action that was then appealed to the Coastal Commission by all of those appellants. That appeal was, this is in the stuff that you guys, that I just gave you guys, make sure I'm dealing with the right
At this
stuff.
point in time, Chair Bartels, it probably would be appropriate to mark those 2 documents, the Planning Commission's 2004 decision on the Saperstein appeal, and also mark the Board of Supervisors resolution affirming the Planning Commission's decision of 2004, and put that in the record as well.
Okay, I did not make copies of these, but I would like, so please mark them, but then I need them back for my case file. Okay, so then the item was appealed to the Coastal Commission, and it was appealed following the board's action and then ultimately acted upon on August 10th by the Coastal Commission. And what it says is they grant the permit subject to the attached standard and special conditions. And so then the special, I'll show you. That's oh. So then this is what the included then are attached to this, what are called revised site plans, as you indicate down here. This stamp is a Coastal Commission stamp, 72605, and then also their exhibit number from their hearing on the application. And then as you can see, there is the building height line at 28, the parapet indicated. Essentially, it looks pretty much the same as what we had, but there is this additional information. It says, okay, and another little note over there. And then, as the Coastal Commission said, it also attached some special conditions. I presented your packet that includes those special conditions that the Coastal Commission. So I'll just read the headings on because it's kind of hard to see. Their special conditions had to do with sort of building it to the plans that were, provided. No future shoreline protective devices. Assumption of risk waiver, which is standard and we require, construction responsibilities, debris excavation materials, landscape plans. I had to do a landscape design, and which had to be approved by the Coastal Commission. These are all Coastal Commission conditions, so become part of the permit. the landscaping plans. I always find this interesting that they often put this on appeal conditions. They want the applicant to use the recommended list of plants and landscaping for the Santa Monica Mountains, which I find interesting for the coast, but that's what they say. Interim erosion control plan, monitoring, site lighting restriction, and a generic deed restriction. So those were the special conditions that were applied by the Coastal Commission back in 2005. Then there were things that the Sapersteins had to agree to, things that they had to sign, and they went through all of that. And then, as was mentioned, there was a violation reported to the Coastal Commission, and the Coastal Commission ultimately sent this letter to the Sapersteins indicating that they were closing their violation. The staff has determined, after receiving additional information, that the project, as built, substantially conforms to the approved plans. And then they go on to say, but if you plan to change your plans, you got to come back to the commission. So that was the disposition of the complaint that was heard or was sent to the Coastal Commission. Following that, that was actually just ahead of that. That letter's sent saying that they had closed the violation. They had actually closed it before, but the letter was distributed in December. But back the previous November, again, these same plans that have this, revised 72605 has the Coastal Commission stamp on it, saying that the plans are substantially in conformance with previously approved plans. So that is what the Sapersteins then went ahead with. There was a question about this project having come back to your commission, and I'm really struggling. The planning division began a permit tracking system in January 1st, 2004. And all actions that happen by building and safety or planning are recorded and tracked by parcel number. And there was never a building and safety violation open, nor do I see where this project would have come back to your commission.
It came back, to clarify, go ahead.
I think I might have gotten this confused with another project in the area about it coming back.
But
I can't find it. I have no record.
but there was extensive discussion because Saperstein kept coming up. So, I mean,
Which is why I had this information so easily and readily available. So, I believe, were there other questions that you had? I think I covered what I said I was going to get. Yes.
Let me be sure I understand just the big picture here. Our commission made a decision regarding Saperstein. Saperstein appealed it to the board.
No, not Saperstein.
No.
The neighbors appealed.
Okay. It was appealed to the Board of Supervisors.
Yes.
They upheld our decision.
Correct.
It was appealed to the Coastal Commission.
Yes.
They upheld our decision.
With special conditions.
Yes, but as far as the ceiling height and everything else,
Yes.
that was upheld by the Coastal Commission.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Our decision had ceiling height in it?
Well,
No,
see,
no.
no roof.
Roof.
Roof height. Roof height. It's upheld your decision regarding roof height at 25 feet. Thank you.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
See? Correct.
I'm sorry. The document you just gave us from the Coastal Commission dated December 3rd, you're referencing, succeeded the notice violation that was sent to the Sapersteins on September 4th?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. And I think that if you look, it should have the same violation attached to it. In both the September letter and in the December. That September one is quite voluminous, and I did not have to that one, just the resolution and the violation.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dukas?
I'm not sure if now's the appropriate time to ask. Are we bound by what we decided with Saperstein?
Are you asking me?
We're asking County Council.
Your decision in the Saperstein appeal, so long as it bears on the same subject matter that you are being faced with today, then that is a decision that is yours. It has not been changed. It's too late to change it, and the board approved your decision of 2004, including those 3 conditions you added to the project, which indicates your understanding of the issue as well as how you read the code as it applies to building height, walls, parapets, and things of that nature. So yes, it would be binding on you.
Okay. Any other questions for staff at this time? Right. Then I would open the public hearing and would go ahead and I think it's important at this point for disclosures on the part of the Commission. Commissioner Molitor?
I visited the site last Friday and knocked on the door and also looked around some of the other places that were noted. Just kind of an aside, I purchased a piece of property in this area in 1975 and moved in 1977 and lived there for about 5 years. I was about a block and a half. I was on La Brea, about a block and a half from the beach and a block from Ocean. I want to just relate to what it was like walking down Ocean Avenue in 1977. There were quite a few vacant lots available at that time at $40,000 a piece, which I didn't buy. There were also a lot of small homes that had been built in the 20s and 30s, and there's still a few left. I had an ocean view from my home at that time, which didn't last very long because of the building. But I don't remember any homes being on Ocean being above 2 stories back in 77. Or I guess they're still not 2 stories. But I don't remember that at all. Then came the process whereby the basement concept came in. So they became, in effect, 3 stories with the basement. And that seems to be what the situation is now. Anyway, I just want to put that as an aside. I've been through there. I've lived down there. It's a fantastic area to live. Now these homes, of course, are on Ocean Avenue, at least on the ocean side, are multi-million-dollar homes. So yes, I did visit the site. I'm curious, the home just to the south of the appellant's project is a brick. And there's a photograph of it in here. I don't know how you would notice that, but the photograph of the appellant's home and the home next door, and I'm just looking at the parapet on that home. I'm assuming that is the roof is 25 feet, and that parapet's sticking up. You follow where I am on this?
Even if I did, I would
Okay.
not respond to you without having the plans.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So, all right. It doesn't look, I mean, I can't tell. It's just,
As I've said, appearance is very difficult.
yes. Okay. I'm sorry. Those are my disclosures.
Commissioner Dukas?
I visited the site yesterday. I went to an open house. I spoke to not an agent, but the person who was showing the house. Gave me a piece of paper, which I cleverly left at home, about how much the house is going for. She gave me some information that what the personal plans were of the property owner, and visited up and down the street, didn't talk to anyone else, and don't have anything else to disclose rather than what's just right here.
I've also visited this site and driven this street through the years. I was out there, ironically, on Thursday, having nothing to do with this, and having then looked at the packet, it's always intriguing to be on Ocean. So, Commissioner Rodriguez.
I first became aware of these appeal issues through contact from Supervisor Flynn's office when I was asked to come in and meet with the one of the appellants over this issue that was before the Coastal Commission at that time. I certainly was not sitting on this board in 2004 when that issue came here. I'm a resident of Silver Strand. I've been there for, we've owned the house approximately 35 years. I've gone through a reconstruction from an A-frame to a conventional Cape Cod. I'm familiar with what's going on down there, and I also see the way construction goes up, and much more attuned to it now that I have access to the codes, and I can see, I question some of the stuff that I see, but beyond that, once I got the package, I went out and familiarized myself with the locations, and I took digital pictures of the residences for my reference, and I put together my packet of pictures. I referenced notes from the staff report to the individual pictures for my ease of digestion. I had a clean copy of pictures that the clerk has copied for and made a part of the record. Unfortunately, they returned in an order that was different from the order that I gave her, so I've had to reshuffle mine, and the addresses no longer are in sequence with the report, so if it comes up, we'll have to shuffle a little bit. That's really about it.
Just real quickly, besides the disclosures that each of the commissioners have put on the record, is there any other information that you are relying upon that's not included in the package this morning, other than the ones you've already stated?
No, not me.
Okay.
Is that a no, Commissioner?
No.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, in conversation through Supervisor Flynn's office on the Saperstein issue, they presented me with a variety of documents to review in conjunction with that meeting with the appellant, and I did see what the correspondence between, I guess it originated from the Coastal Commission and came back. There were two separate documents, and they were referenced by Ms. Francis here.
Thank you.
All right. This is an appeal, and I have no speaker cards, so I will let the appellant present in whatever manner I would request, however, that before we leave this august body that we have speaker cards to support the record. But that aside, if you could state your name and address for the record, and let's hear your side.
Hi, my name is John Ish. For the record, I've been a resident of Silver Strand Beach for about 35 years and an active real estate broker in that community for the last 29 years. I just wanted to speak before...
Excuse me, I didn't catch your last name, sir. Your last name?
Ish, E-A-S-H.
Okay.
I wanted to talk a little bit of the bigger picture before we get into the details. And I want to thank Nancy Francis for her presentation, for the Planning Commission taking time to hear this matter. The background on the actual language for the height code that you currently have in the RBH zone was actually written by Walt and myself. This came about because there was no actual cap on height in the RBH zone at all. There was an average of 25 feet. And a builder in the area, not Walt, had started to do homes that started out two-story on the street and swept way up, came back down, and they met the legal guidelines of 25-foot average, but they ended up coming out at 33 feet. This is the first time these homes had been built in the community. Some of the residents and communities got a little concerned about that and not understanding all the issues and everything like that. The Community Services District, which was one of the founding members appointed by Supervisor John Flynn to form that Community Services District, had us create an ad hoc committee to work with the residents down there to come up with something that would be workable for everybody. The first knee-jerk reaction from the community was to cut the height down to like 22 feet. which would have penalized a lot of existing owners down there not even be able to rebuild their homes if they burnt down. So Walt and I worked together with the community, and in doing so, we ended up having a compromise at 28 feet. And that was kind of arrived at because if you looked in the planning guidelines for height at that time, it said 25 feet, and there was a little asterisk, and often people wouldn't go past the asterisk to read about the average, and so there was a lot of heated discussions that building had exceeded the 25-foot height, not realizing there was a 25-foot average. At that time, safety rails were 36 inches or parapet walls, and so the figure that was picked to work with the community at that time was 28 feet. And that was, and the reason, one of the primary reasons, and this, for everybody who's working on that ad hoc committee and with the community, that we wanted to work with that height, and everybody agreed, was to promote architectural diversity in the community, not to hamper it. And that's why you have the ability to get more space, livable space, actually above the 25-foot height by doing a roof averaging and working with the wall height in order to do that. Sometimes you give up a little to do that, and now there's been new designs that have to do with barrels that nobody was even thinking about at that time, and now have been worked in, everybody's having to deal with and stuff like that. But I just wanted to impress upon the Planning Commission here, this was done to promote architectural diversity and set a cap, and it was something I actually, and Walt, we wrote these height guidelines. We know what the intent was to be. I also want to point out to the Planning Commission that the code allows 25-foot high box, if you wanted to call it so, and a 3-foot railing or parapet wall, whatever you want to call that. And that doesn't have to be an open railing. And that means there is, for anything we're discussing today, there is no difference in view no matter how this goes. 25-foot structure with a 3-foot wall around it creates 28-foot height, no matter how the commission rules today. And so view is not an issue in this whatsoever. In my way of thinking, knowing the original intent of why everything came together, is to promote architectural diversity. And we're dealing with a lot of new plans here. I would hope the Planning Commission would take that under advisement in the spirit of why that language was put together and why the community and our ad hoc committee that created that language actually put it in place. A couple other brief thoughts too. I have a couple clients that sold a couple oceanfront lots 6 months ago, and because of this issue that started out trying to be heard in May, my clients have had to put off building their homes, not knowing what they could build. I mean, the amount of time it's taken to get to this point is just, especially in this economic time with the economy suffering so much, to hold back good projects. And Walt, I'll have to say, is the finest designer and developer in that community. He's probably responsible for more homes being built down there. They're classics. I happen to own one that's designed by him. My only mistake was not having to build it. And Walt's never been one to try to push the envelope like other builders in the area whose names will go unspoken. And I think you're dealing with a very fine individual here. I hope you give him the time to present his case and take it under real sincere advisement here. One of the things too, and this is a little off the subject, is that every time you do something, there's sometimes unintended consequences. And Walt and I found out after putting this in place 6 months later, there's a lot of two-story homeowners down there that are now penalized by this height guideline and the language that was put in place. And the reason for that is often two-story homes, their very first floor ceiling is 8 feet. Anyone can tell you that if you start out with an 8-foot ceiling, because drywall's 8 feet, most of the 2 stories are framed up that way, it's impossible for them to ever get a 3rd floor on that house, just about impossible without destroying the whole home. I would like to see it sometime in the future, the height guidelines be revisited, whether they need to be moved up 6 inches or 8 inches or a foot. And possibly maybe a volume design would be easier for everybody to work with. I see new drawings Nancy Francis has come up with. I think the permutations of this evolvement is just getting crazier and crazier, and the ability to have zoning and planning work within these guidelines is it's just kind of approaching the point of insanity, as I'm sure you may be thinking right now. And whether we end up with a standard of 28 feet, anything that fits in there can go. Anyone building in the community is going to be trying to do something that's a beautiful design. There's an occasional misstep, but most of the designs out there are really cutting edge and quite beautiful, and I think actually improving the look of the whole community. You can have a debate whether homes should be 2-story there or 3-story. The basement plan actually, as a correction, has nothing to do with 3-story homes in the community. That has to do with, at one time, there was requirements for double staircases all the way up through the structure if you built a full 3-story with a certain amount of square footage. 3 stories were allowed before that, are still allowed to be built to this day without the basement plan. Sometime it did get changed from 2-story to 3-story. We're past the point, I think, of ever going back to that. But I'd love to see the spirit of architectural diversity continue in the community. And in the long run, something worked out that'd be much easier for the applicants and people that live in the neighborhood to realize that complies instead of, where we're at right now. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
I don't wish to argue with you, but perhaps I used the wrong word, but a view shed. I noticed that the buildings on my drive-by and walking through and stuff, and particularly with the brick building that's right next to this house as it presently stands, it's more like a view shed. It's so massive versus the houses that don't have the. Would you say that that's an issue? Just the bulk, the massiveness, is a view shed issue?
Well, the way the current language was adopted by the Coastal Commission, Board of Supervisors, and everybody, view shed is nothing in the code at all. I mean, that doesn't exist in the RBH zone, which is just unique to only Silver Strand, Holly by the Sea, and Hollywood Beach. I know the city of Ventura and the Hillsides is dealing with some of those issues right now. I think, a lot of people don't realize that if someone built a 21-foot house across the street from them, their view's gone anyway. So, yeah, the mass of the homes is a little bit larger, but part of the problem right now is the height guidelines are so tight that it's actually, the amount of steel and extra lumber having to go into the flooring, because the floors can't even use, 2x12 joists. They have to use 2x10. Sometimes they have to be doubled up. Got a lot more steel in the structure because the height guidelines are so restrictive. You literally can't even count the 3 layers of drywall on the ceilings on each of the floors and squeeze the height in. I mean, it's really down to 1.5 inches of extra drywall thickness between 3 5/8 inches of drywall on the ceiling on the first floor, second floor, and the third floor. That's how tight the guidelines are. Without some flexibility and allowing the projects to go through as they were previously approved, I think impacts the ability of the designers to work with the house and create a livable situation. The roofs are already, the ceiling heights in those homes are already at the minimum, if not even below, by the time you add drywall and things like that. It's a very, very tough situation to work with. And the fact the architects can actually come up with those really incredible designs, if you've had a chance to actually walk in some of those homes, it's really amazing what they do on a 35 by 70 foot lot. It's quite amazing. It's been an evolution over 30 years. And I think that the folks that reside in those homes enjoy those. There could be a debate about the people that live across from those, but the code allows a 25-foot cube and a 3-foot high solid barrier. And that's it. If you actually met that, you could get that approved and built that way. Fortunately, nobody really does that. There's an example in Holly by the Sea, unfortunately, but most people won't do that because it's against their own self-interest. So.
Well, and I agree with you there. But the house presently, I didn't see any drywall. It was redwood, and there's no drywall at all. So that pitch is there's no ceiling blocking, all the way up to the top of the structure. So it is very spacious. You're not at all. You don't at all feel like you're limited.
Well, a lot of that is because a lot of the plans have 2-story height ceilings because you eliminate a whole floor above in order to create that.
But there's really no limit. I mean, you're not limited to having drywall. We would, the kinds of wall treatments, you don't have any kind of limitations on you.
Well, it's not that. It's just that the minimum ceiling height in each floor has to be 7.5 feet. So if you take 3 floors, that puts you at 22.5. That leaves you 30 inches left over to put your floor joist in, and on what would be the ceiling on the first floor, ceiling on the second floor, and get the roof in there. And that's a minimal amount of space, and that's a 2x10 floor joist, and you're not even talking drywall or wood veneer over the top of that. So the guidelines are so tight right now, it's very difficult for the architects to work with that. And I would ask the Planning Commission to err on the side of working with the applicant on this, because it's actually created burdens. It drives cost up tremendously. You could make a green statement about it because of the extra wood they're having to use and steel to make it as it is right now. It just drives cost up and expenses, and we're working within very, very slim guidelines where actually the thickness of the drywall can make the difference of whether you're making what you're trying to do or not. It's that tight. And under the current code too, you're allowed to have a pitched roof. My house happens to have a pitched roof where the average of the roof line is 25 feet, but the peak of my roof is 28. And I give up some by averaging it, because part of the roof has to fall below 25 in order to make that, and some can be at 25 foot at the top of the wall to do that. But that allows you to get more volume in the house, and so that can be accomplished under the existing code also.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's a speaker card, I have an appointment I'm going to have to get to.
Any other questions? All right. There should be speaker cards out at the front.
Okay, I'll fill it out. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Walt Phillips. I'm the applicant in the project, and this is Steve Kaiser. He's the owner of the project. I've got my talking points that I need to have handed out.
To the clerk, and we'll get them stamped in so we can. Go ahead.
Oh, great. Well, I'm finally happy to be here. We've been waiting a long time, and we just like to get this resolved today if possible. I broke this down in 3 packages. First will be my talking points that I'll be referring to. They're labeled 1 to 20. Second package refers to plans that were approved showing top of double plate at 25 feet. And then the third one, which is the very important project that was approved was the John Drake project, and I'll be referring to all of those. I've got to warn you, I'm not as eloquent as Nancy is in discussing this. I won't be as smooth and as polished, but I'll get through it. I started in the area in 1974. My very first house was on the oceanfront in Silver Strand in 77. And at the time, we were dealing with the building department over on Santa Clara. It was so easy. There was a guy named Ray. He would take the plans in, and there wasn't all the reviews that we have currently going on. It was so easy, and it's progressively gotten harder and harder and harder to the point where we are now. But all the departments that currently are here in this building, I know every one of the heads of the departments. If I ever have a problem, I come in and talk to them. I talk to Kim, head of the building department, the head of the public works, and whenever we have a problem, we seem to work it out. I know there was a issue that just came up last year over public works where they wanted the garage floor to be raised up 6 inches. And in the RBH zone, and what you can hear from John Ish, that can't be done. And I worked with staff trying to get it through, trying to get it overturned. And I finally ended up talking to Alec Pringle. And after three weeks, he came back and said, "Okay, well, we'll back off on that. If it comes up again, we'll give you plenty of notice." So that was great. I've had other issues with building department, and again, you work it out. And that's what I was hoping that was going to happen on this project, but it just didn't quite go that way. Okay, getting into the talking points. If you turn to the first page, this is the ordinance 3654, and I discovered this by getting on the county government website in search of a matrix. And I didn't find the matrix I was looking for, but I'm not quite sure what year this was developed. Maybe Nancy can help us with this. But what's interesting, you look at section 8180-3.4, it says height. No building or structure except roof structure shall exceed a height of 25 feet. You know, this was the basis when they started the coastal zone. This was probably the first version of their ordinance that was developed. Second page, again, I think it was at the same time that first page, there was a setback exception and a height exception to the ordinance, saying if you double your setback, you can build a house up to about 35 feet. I don't know how tall this house is, but it must be at least 35 feet tall or 30 feet tall.
Excuse me, this house is on ocean, but not oceanfront.
This is inboard.
Inboard, okay.
Yes. Okay, there's not a picture to go with this, but in the 80s, Coastal Commission restricted the development of RBH zones to strictly 2-story. They actually told you for a certain size lot, you couldn't have but X amount of square footage, but there was a period of time where even though we would want to build 3 stories, we weren't able to because the Coastal Commission put a lid on it. Okay, pages 3 and 4 are roof lines that we developed with the Channel Islands Water District. This was John and I and the other group, and like I said, it was very, very, very restrictive, but it was pretty cut and dry when you looked at it. The page 3 shows a ridge line at 28 feet, an exterior wall at 25 feet to the right and to the left, another exterior wall at 19, and you were able to average both sides to show a 25-foot compliance. And in the guidelines, you couldn't extend past that with like a curve from a barrel roof or a curved roof. There is an exception. If you had a dormer roof, you could go out at 25 feet, top of the dormer, out to the sides, but that was the only exception. If you turn to page 4, that kind of shows it a little bit plainer with a little different roof line. You have a dormer at 25 feet. This particular plan had a ridge line at 26.5 and an outside wall of 23 foot 6 inches. It gave me a midpoint of 25 feet. So that was kind of the envelope that was developed when the ad hoc committee got together. Like John was saying, we shot ourselves in the foot. We made this envelope so tight that just with the changes of interpretations from the building department, right now, well, in the past we used to have 7.5-foot dimensions from floor to ceiling in the rough without drywall. Now, with the new code being implemented, they're now asking us to add a 1/2 inch. So now the 7.5 feet is from concrete floor or plywood floor to the drywall, then plus the drywall, and that's the dimension. So we're losing a good 1.5 inches right now just because of this new take on building height. So just in the last month and a half, I found this out. So we're being pushed and pushed and pushed in this envelope. Okay, number 5. This was built. I can't remember what year this was built, but this is the one that the community got upset about. Actually, the building inspector said this didn't comply, and I don't know how it got justified, but you can see this. I think this was maybe the start of the barrel roof, where we had straight lines that were shown on my previous drawing. The roof was pushing out past those lines, but somehow this got approved and it's built. Okay, number 6, page 6. That's just a quick look at the 2 projects that I was involved in. The left one for the Hoover was built before the Chris Stevens memo of 2004 was produced. It had a barrel ceiling in it that currently we cannot do, but from the street, if you look at the Hoover house and the Drake house, you wouldn't know the difference. And I think that's the point that Nancy was making and John Eash was making. By the time you have your 3-foot parapet wall around the building, whatever happens on the other side has no impact on the neighbors or anybody. It's just not important what actually goes on behind that parapet wall. On the basement concept, this is interesting. When it first came out, the designers started using the basement concept because building a true 3-story house was really, again, restrictive in the fact that you had 2 staircases required from the 3rd floor all the way down to the ground floor, and there were separation issues that you had to maintain, and it just cut the house in half. It just wasn't working. So we ended up turning to this basement concept where 50% of the perimeter of the house is raised up, say 3 feet, and then by building definition, your garage is basement, and the 2nd floor is 1st floor, and 3rd floor is 2nd floor. So we were allowed just to have 1 staircase going down. We didn't pick up any height, any more volume. It was just really a terminology issue with the building department. At the time, when we first turned this in over to planning said, wait a minute. Your 2nd floor is now called 1st floor, and we don't want you to project out 48 inches into the required.
Commissioner Rodriguez has a question.
Excuse me, not to interrupt your thought. You mentioned the staircases from 3rd floor down to the ground. Was that the purpose of that? It was a safety issue, I assume, because of the height that you were at.
Well, it was for any 3-story level.
Yes.
The building code says you have a 3-story house, you need 2 distinct staircases. Again, for fire exiting issues.
Exactly. So it was a safety issue.
And then the basement plan, in a sense, got around that.
Circumvented the
Still a 3-story
safety.
house, but they still allowed us 1 staircase.
But it circumvented the safety issue of that was originally in place.
Yeah, it was an
Before
exception.
the basement house definition was.
It was an exception they gave you in the building code.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, anyway, getting back to planning. Planning was saying because 2nd floor is now 1st floor, you have to cut back the house at that level to the 20-foot setback. And I went to Tom Berg, was getting his inspection. And when I went to Supervisor Flynn, he stepped in and actually got it reversed to the point where it is now, where planning department was trying to use building department's terminology to have us cut back that 2nd floor, and that was overturned. I have here sections out of the building plans that were approved, actually for 9 different projects. I found one additional project as I was going through that was called the Doherty project.
Excuse me, what page are you referring to on your
Oh, excuse me, this is
talking notes?
in where it says sections, it was a separate handout, sections from approved plans showing 25-foot to double plate.
So you jumped from your first document to
Oh,
your
yeah,
third
that's-
document?
Yes.
To
And I'll do that again when we get to the John.
your second document? Excuse me. Is this the document you're referring to now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, if you turn the pages, and this is something Nancy brought up, that they weren't, they're not familiar with top of wall, top of double plate. They're not familiar with terminology where it says, or addresses top of a structural beam. All these pages, if you flip through them, they're very, very, very clear as to what my intentions were and what was approved. You get to the first project, the Doherty job. You show 25 feet to the top of the wall. You go to the next page for the Wayne Page project.
Hold on.
Does this work? I don't know how to work.
Just put it down on top of it. It sure does. No, right, face up.
Yeah, just place it face up.
I should have brought my daughter, but she has to help.
Now, gentlemen,
Could we have the overhead? Thank you.
and then there is a.
How do you shrink it?
Yeah, zoom out. They're little tiny buttons that
There you go.
tell you.
Okay.
So just those guys just tell you, and then wide.
Okay.
It says down there, right, like your camera.
Okay. You can see on, this is great, 25 feet from where finished floor would be.
Can you turn it right side up? I'm getting nauseous.
Other way. Other way. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, you look at it and it'll show.
How do I shrink this down?
All right.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. 25 feet. Measure from finished floor to the top of the double plate. Flip to the next page. It says over here on the left side, this is actually was tried to present a little clearer. It said 25 feet maximum to double plate. And I say 24 foot 6 7/8 of an inch actual. But again, lines definitely show we're measuring up to the ceiling line. We're not measuring up to the roof line. This is the Scott Hooper project. 3625 Ocean Drive. 24 foot, 10 1/4 inches. Again, very clearly showing top of double plate. Next page shows the Bill Carter project. 25 foot maximum. Dimension line to top of double plate. The Henry House. 25 foot maximum to double plate. Like I said, it's very, very, very clear. And for planning to say things were ambiguous and there was a terminology problem, I just don't see it. Now this one's kind of important. You've got a better picture of it. This is the John Drake house. Again, showing top of double plate. The difference between John Drake's plans and the ones previous, and we had to make a change because of the memo that was developed by Chris Stevens. And this was the change. They want to comply. I had to show an actual ridge line on Drake's plan, which I didn't have on the other plans. It doesn't show it too clearly, but you can see just to the left of the skylight, there's a high point of the roof shown. That is your ridge line. And to get John Drake's approved, working with Chris Stevens, Nancy Francis, and the planner, Dan Clemens, to have the 25-foot basically to my interior ceilings, I had to show that I had a ridge line and which parallels the outside wall and the roof sloping down to the perimeter walls. That then allows this plan to be approved, and it complies with the ordinances that are written, which I'll get into later. But again, as far as showing that there was a consistent interpretation on where the measurement was for these types of homes, it shows again here 24 foot 10 1/4 inches. Okay, the Sagal project. Okay, 25 feet, top of double plate. Happens that also Dan Clemens not only was responsible for processing and getting approval on the John Drake project, he was also involved in the Sam Sagal project. So there was a, he understood what the issues were with the Drake project, and we applied them, and he approved, and we were able to get the Sagal project approved on the same basis. Next two projects are not oceanfront, but they basically go through quite a bit of the same review. They don't have public hearings, but the plans are taken, they go back to management. Nancy Francis, after the memo of Chris Stevens in 2004, wanted to be the one to hit the final say on all the zone clearances. So staff would gather information, take it to Nancy. Nancy would return it with comments. So from 2004 on, it wasn't staff issuing zone clearances alone. It always had a review. The review was management and Nancy Francis. Okay, and then a final example. Again, the Lansing house, 3544 Ocean Drive, again, shows 25 feet to the top of double plate, which is the ceiling height. Now, interesting enough time-wise on this, if you look at the Sagal project, the Kaiser project, and the Lansing project, which were the last three that I submitted, those were all approved in 2007. I think Lansing was the last one approved. It was, say, January, February, no, not January, it was June, July, August of 2007. In November, I brought Steve Kaiser's project in with two other projects. Same basis, same everything, and they said it was incomplete, it had to be redrawn, it's not correct. And that's the reason that we're here today, because of this train wreck that they caused by changing their interpretation. Okay, the next pamphlet I'd like to take a look at is the John Drake. When John Drake's memo was developed, I looked at this and I said, this is great. Clearly says everything that a designer needs to be to make these houses work. Prior to this, it was all verbal. Nothing was written down. Tom Berg did make a decision where, again, he would measure to the top of the double plate when he was planning director, but it wasn't written. It was just kind of conversation between staff and Tom Berg. And I think the first two or three of my plans that I showed you originally, I think it was the Doherty, the Page, and the Hoover was approved during the Tom Berg era. But again, this was so precise, and this was the document that was used, again, to help the new planner, Dan Clemens, understand how to deal with the coastal zone. Dan Clemens, this was his first review of a coastal zone application, and that's why he was working so closely with Chris Stevens and Nancy Francis. This was a training session for him. And it wasn't Dan Clemens making his decision. He was being guided through the whole process through Nancy and, did I say Kim? I didn't. Okay, Chris Stevens and Nancy Francis were guiding this whole process. They were hands-on on getting this project approved. Yeah, page 2, this is a excerpt. Except for living areas directly below pitched roofs with main ridge lines, no interior ceilings may exceed 25 feet. To supplement that, we had page 3 shows the diagram, and in zone B, area B, limited to all roof structures. Page 4, this is a letter written to me saying the project is incomplete. And in the sentences, they talk about ceiling heights. And they have down here, I underlined, it says, provide the interior ceiling below, provided that the interior ceiling below the dome roof does not exceed 25 feet. Now Nancy is saying that ceiling is not in planning's words of use, but again, it's being mentioned in 3 different locations. They're asking that the ceiling be reduced down to 20 feet on another statement. And the second paragraph, in order to allow the dome portion of the master suite to extend above 25 feet, an interior ceiling must be provided underneath this area that does not exceed 25 feet. Then we have another drawing, which is 7, page 7, where you can see 25 feet to a dimension line going over to the ceiling level, and it clearly shows what they expected of me and expected of the Sapersteins. Okay, getting back to the time frame where we submitted the plans and specifics, Steve Kaiser to planning, and they finally sent me a level of incompleteness. I had a meeting, we had a number of meetings, and I was trying to get a meeting with Nancy Francis and Supervisor Flynn to review all the issues, but we just weren't able to pull it off. Nancy said, well, we've got this hearing coming up, we'll just discuss it at that hearing. But a lot of the issues could have been talked about in front of Flynn, and we could have probably avoided this appeal just by that conversation, but I wasn't able to get anybody there to cooperate. Now, I know Kim went over there a number of times to talk to Supervisor Flynn, and he had asked Kim to have hearings, bring in architects and builders and all, and just kind of hash this out. But I don't know if that's being scheduled or if that's. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, the meetings that I had with Supervisor Flynn to say, based on the decisions that are made today, we will clearly articulate what it is that we're expecting in our ordinance and how to comply with the ordinance, and then hold some training sessions for the people that do work in the coast so we all understand with what we're saying. But this particular hearing had to be held first.
Okay. Anyway, to continue. Also, I had a meeting with Chris Stevens, and I had brought some examples and showed him things that were currently being approved that they were approved, but they didn't meet the coastal ordinance, and he was a little taken back by that. And I said, Chris, I know there's a number of other projects like this that are out there. I just haven't ran into them. 2 days later, I get a call from Martha Picciotti, which is a local architect. Martha had a plan that was basically similar to mine, where we had 25-foot ceilings. And apparently she had received planning approval, she had received coastal approval, and her contractor was about to pull the permits. And they got a letter from Lori Baker, which is the planner that was handling initially the Kaiser project. But she got a letter from Lori Baker. Let me see if I can find that. That's page 7 and 8. Now, let me back off a bit. Lori Baker and Kim Rodriguez and Nancy Francis and Chris Stevens all had a meeting with Steve Kaiser and myself, and they looked at me and they said, "Walt, why do you think you should be able to get a 25-foot ceiling height? Nobody else has been getting that." And then I find out, after my discussion with Chris Stevens and after I talked to Martha Picciotti, she had a plan that was approved basically identical to mine. But Lori Baker and everybody else said, no, nothing else has been approved. We don't do that. Well, why are they processing Martha Picciotti's plans, which were basically in similar concept to mine? But anyway, if you look at the letter, they basically pull back the approval of Martha Picciotti's plans. And it says, a dispute on how height is measured, which is let me start over. Recently, an appeal was filed by an architect that is going before the Planning Commission in May 15th regarding interpretation of the Coastal Zone Code. And a dispute on how height is measured, it seems identical to this case. The Schmidt case, unfortunately, has gotten caught up in the current dispute. Now, I'm looking at that. I'm thinking, what do you mean caught up? Is it right or is it wrong? Why? They made it sound like the Schmidt case was going to go ahead and they were going to pull permits, but because of my appeal being followed, that they were caught up in it and approval had to be taken back. Martha calls me up. He says, "Thanks a lot, Walt. Why'd you do that?" And I said, "I didn't do anything." Then at the second page it says, "The Planning Division is working now to correct the confusion as to what the code says and appears. And it appears. No final determination has been made." Okay, if we go to page 9, this is a letter from Chris Stevens. And what's important, if you look at the date says February 12th. Subject, clarification of the July memo. The email from Lori Baker to Martha Picciotti was dated April 22nd. So why in this email is Lori saying no final determination has been made? Final determination was made when Chris Stevens put this memo out February 12th, clarification of the July 14th, 2004 memo. Okay, excuse me, losing my voice here. Okay, getting back to we'll talk a little bit about John Drake's plan. John Drake's plan, remember I told you that we wanted a modification, and this is page 10 that I'd like you to turn to. On the John Drake plan that was approved, to comply with the ordinance, we had to show a ridge going through the center of the house and a slope going to the two sides. Okay, that's, let me get oriented here again. Okay, this addition to the John Drake plan shows compliance to Ordinance 8175-3.13. Okay, that section states, in no case shall the finished height of an exterior wall running parallel to the main ridge of a pitched or hip roof exceed the finished height of 25 feet. The John Drake house, the Steve Kaiser house, has met that requirement. We have a ridge going down the center of the building. The outside walls are shown at 24 foot 10 inches. And based upon that change during the Drake project, that plan was approved, and this is the same roof line that's on the Steve Kaiser plan. And I think what it is, I don't think staff realize that. Again, when we started out with the John Drake house, we had a planner that was brand new, didn't really know where he was going. And with the Steve Kaiser plan, Lori Baker was brand new, just really didn't know where she was going. But in the John Drake project, Dan Clemens was working hand in hand with management. And I don't think that happened on this case, because I think if this was brought to somebody's attention, they would have stepped back and say, oh, well, yeah, this does comply. And that's what I was talking to Kim about outside. I say, we're here today because I don't believe planning fully understood what I was presenting. Even though those plans were identical to the John Drake plan, they didn't take the time to sit down and review it to see if it did comply. Yeah, page 11 is the roof plan of the Kaiser project, again showing ridge line and the roof lines sloping left and right to the outside exterior walls. I'm going to skip around a little bit here. Planning's, I guess, definitions. They talk about building height. Down here, height of any building is the vertical distance. This is page 12. The height of any building is the vertical distance from the grade or other datum point to the highest point of the coping of a flat roof or mansard roof. In Nancy's description, they're taking both of those points as the same. And they're not. A flat roof is different from a mansard roof. A mansard roof, and you look also at the definition of coping, which is page 13. Coping says the top part of a wall. Okay, now if you follow through and look at page 14, where is actually a proper drawing of a mansard roof, you have a parapet wall, which is allowed as 3 feet above the 25 feet. And the rest of the framing is the mansard roof. You have the mansard roof is one of the components of the mansard roof is the parapet wall. So when you look at that definition, they have two distinct structures they're talking about. They're talking about the flat roof as one, mansard roof as another. That's not the same thing. There's no reason that this definition would give two different examples of the same thing. Now, if you go back to a matrix I referred to back originally, I was trying to find the matrix that was originally developed, and I just wasn't able to find it. It was the same matrix that talked about increased setbacks that allowed that one structure at the south end of Hollywood Beach to be built up 30, 35 feet tall. I couldn't find that, but I'm going back 30 years. Hopefully I'm correct on this. I remember there was a section in that original matrix that allowed, it said that we were allowed to have a mansard roof that's or a parapet up to that 28 feet. And that's the reason that we have two different references here under building height definition, flat roof and mansard roof. It identified what was originally in the ordinance that was taken out. Okay, page 15. This is the drawings that were provided by Chris Stevens with these examples of different roof styles. if you look at what he shows as a mansard roof, that's just totally not correct. What they're showing here is more of an architectural projection that's allowed in the code. This is not a roof structure. This is framing that's put on the side of a wall of a home. It has nothing to do with the roof structure. If you turn to page...
Excuse me, doesn't it refer to roof structure as it relates to the height? I mean, I think that's what that diagram is trying to depict.
No, they're trying to
Maximum
depict
height.
a roof style. I'm saying that's not correctly...
But defines the height of that roof style.
Well,
It says 25 feet.
well, that's 25 feet, but what I'm saying, that is not a mansard roof. This is not a mansard roof they have shown here. Mansard roof, you get back to page 14, is a mansard roof. It's above what they show, the 25 feet. If you turn to page 16, I think I can clarify this a little bit further with you. What they have down here as an example of a shed roof, you see where they have a sample of a shed roof. That is not a shed roof. And right above where I have 16, a shed roof goes continually from one wall to the other one. That actually has been outlawed. That's not an approved roof structure, having a shed roof. You cannot have a shed roof. But what they show here as an example of a shed roof is actually a mansard roof. Okay, kind of continuing over, there's another example which kind of caught my eye. A gambrel roof. Remember we were talking about how to show height averaging? I don't know how the gambrel roof ever got approved. They've got sections of the roof which again goes past the imaginary line from the roof to the from the ridge line to the outside walls. Why is that being approved? It's just beyond me. I just don't know how that ever got on as one of the approved roof styles. If you turn to page 7, that particular example of a gambrel roof was actually approved recently. And you got a copy of the actual zone clearance. And I'm looking at this. I'm trying to see how they even justified it on the architectural drawings. And you look at the north elevations, there really isn't any dimensions showing anything. I don't have a maximum height, that dimension line going from the finished floor at the top of the roof, that's left blank. On the section BB, you can see where I have an asterisk. It says roof midpoint. But what is that pointing to? I kind of help clarify what I'm seeing here, where I show low point, high point, and true midpoint of the roof that they show here. But how is this being approved? I had called up Kim to ask if I can get a clarification, so I wouldn't have to bring it up in today's session, but I never got a call back from Kim. Page 18 kind of clarifies more what I'm asking. You know, we're supposed to have a straight line from the ridge line down to the lower part of the roof. And you've got structures that are pushing past that. And my question is why? It just doesn't comply with what I was involved in when all these guidelines were established. Page 19, that's a project that a client of mine, Scott Hoover, bought, and he bought it with a set of plans that we decided not to use, but these plans were approved. And you see it's a shed roof. Like I said before, a shed roof isn't a roof that's been approved. But what's more telling is a couple factors here. We've got maximum, remember there's a section in the ordinance where we cannot have an exterior wall taller than 25 feet. It's just kind of hard to see here, but if you look on the dimension line where they say 25 feet, then they have another dimension line above that.
Could you put it on the overhead so we can follow where you are pointing?
Oh, wrong way, I'm sorry. Well, it's not clear on the screen, but right here it says 25 feet maximum building height to midpoint of roof is 25 feet. And you see above that, there's another, I think 12 inches above that to the top of the roof structure. So we've got a project where it shows an exterior wall at 26 feet, not supported by any ordinance. And the question is, how does this get approved? Also, next to the asterisk, you can see there's another dimension line that was used to show roof averaging. You see, it references plate height. So what they have here, it's not really a roof average. They're measuring from the top of the double plate to the left to the top of the roof peak on the right and coming up with an average. But what kind of average is that? You're not averaging the roof. You're starting from a double plate on one end and plywood roof on the other. That's just a phony roof averaging. So you got two problems here. But this referencing plate height, again, management has been saying that they don't measure to double plate. They don't know what the terminology double plate is, but here it is. On this example, they show this as something they've approved. So
Could you remember that the masses are also listening, so let's make sure they can hear.
where'd you, okay. Just to repeat again, the plans show dimensions to the height of the double plate. And so that's one point of the roof averaging formula. The other point is the roof peak, which they have at 26 feet. Don't you think roof averaging should be at the low end plywood and at the high end plywood? Why are you measuring from an interior wall to the top of a plywood on the other end? Doesn't make sense. But this has been approved. It's been approved as a shed roof, and I believe it's incorrect. Okay, last drawing I have is number 20. That shows the cross-section of a plan that you've already seen with Nancy. This is where Nancy's saying that I'm creating a living area by using the approved staircase, the approved skylight shaft as a way to get access up to the third level sun deck. And my response to that is, if you look at the components, the skylight by itself is approved. You look at the ceiling height in the living room being taller than 7.5 feet. That's not contrary to any ordinance. So if the two components are fine and the volume of space that's created is fine, by just connecting through a staircase the master to the sun deck, how does that then automatically cause it not to be approved? I'm not creating any extra space. Actually, I could have built the master suite all the way out, in line with the exterior wall of the living room. So I'm actually, with this concept, I'm sacrificing an area equivalent to, say, 12 feet by 29 feet of living area. I'm not picking up living area. I'm actually sacrificing it for this effect. But the effect was so dynamic, having a living room about 9 to 10 foot ceilings, it was worth it. And this house has been a very, very popular house. People just love it because of the high ceilings. But if you look at the beach side and look back at the house, what do you see? You're basically seeing a two-story house. It doesn't have the bulk that you've been referring to on some other projects. It's just a very low-profile house from the beach side. So anyway, I think what this is, again, with Nancy, it's taken elements, and the designer comes up with a little spin on the elements, and all of a sudden the warning flags come up. But I don't see how this is compromising any part of the ordinance. We're not, again, adding any more square footage to the house. Anyway, I'm just going to summarize here. With what I presented, I think staff and planning can say, okay, this plan does comply with the ordinances, like I previously spoke about. And this is just a comment. In the past, I'd say going back to before Dan Clinton, 2004, whenever I dealt with planning, it was always experienced people at the counter. We had Drew Madrigal. We had a guy named Vogelbaum. We had there was a whole slew of them. I'm losing their names right now. But these were the guys, when we submitted plans, we could sit down. I could explain to them what the components were in the house that shows that it complies with the ordinance. We don't have that any longer. We have people coming in and just green. And we just don't have that communication. That communication's totally been cut off. It goes from the processor to committee, and then responses from the committee back to the processors to me, and there's just no real way where I can converse and explain what's going on with these projects. And that's a shame, because that was something that was real critical. It was a quick and effective way to deal with these projects, and we've lost that. They've started up a new process now where, and this is one of these projects I just showed you, the zone clearance, where it's not only one person making the decision, it's now a committee of 3 people. So when you get a zone clearance now, if you turn back to page 17, okay, you see who signed off on this. It was Carlos. What's Carlos's last name? Who? Oh, Craig Malin. Okay, Craig Malin, but they say per new case. So Craig's not taking responsibility for this being accurate. He was told to issue the zone clearance. So I went up to the counter trying to get an explanation, and Craig says, I don't know, I wasn't involved with this. So again, instead of having one person that's making the call, that has experience to make the call, it's just jumbled around. I can't. I've been dealing with the county for 30 years, and I can't get a straight answer, it seems like. Okay, I do have a defense for planning. A lot of architects, when they draw plans, they don't try to make it clear. They try to make it, they put in key points, which planning and staff review. And these key points, when they quickly look at it, really quickly, it looks like it complies. But when you really look at what's being shown, with someone with an architectural background or construction background can look at these plans and say, this isn't correct. And the house that had the gambrel roof design on it, I was actually invited to bid on the project, and I turned it down because I said, this doesn't work. I said, and I didn't believe it had gotten a zone clearance, but I went and received this from the counter staff. And I turned down bidding the project for another reason too. I didn't want to get involved with something that I knew was wrong. You get it up and built, and all of a sudden people are going to start complaining. And they know I know the rules. And what's going to happen, if this does go up, we're going to get a call over to planning, and planning will finally look at the plans a little bit closer and realize they were drawn incorrectly. They weren't able to make a correct determination because the plans were just ambiguous. And they'll say again, well, we made a mistake. I'm sorry. So I didn't want to get involved with that type of project, so I turned it down. But anyway, I'm hoping. There's a lot on your plate here, and I've gone over way too much, but hopefully you can see our side of the view on this. And like I said, as far as I'm concerned, by the John Drake plan that was reviewed and approved by Chris Stevens and Nancy Francis, it was approved. And we're not doing anything different on the Kaiser plan that was already previously approved by the Drake project. Thank you.
Questions? Commissioner Molitor?
Yes. Thank you for a very extensive presentation on that. Going back to your number 20 on your talking points, which is the plan. You've got the skylight there. You've got a couple skylights there. What's the definition of a skylight from an architectural point of view?
Well, skylight actually could be, there's manufactured skylights that you can have just a flat piece of glass on top.
Right.
And you have other skylights, you can have a glass on top and glass on the four sides. You can have skylights that are up to a ridge line. You can have, you can have a skylight that's shaped like a hipped roof.
Okay.
You can
okay,
have,
that's
they're
fine.
just
That's
your
fine.
imagination, and you can do
Okay,
that with
because
skylight.
you've used the skylight here in a kind of a different way. How big can skylights be? How much of a roof space can they take up?
Well, that was a question I had put to planning, and I know not on my projects. This is the largest skylight I've ever proposed, but I know other skylights, they've approved skylights up to a 10 by 10 area. There's no limit in the ordinance as to a size of a skylight.
Okay. Then why couldn't you come back with another plan to run, let's say, how deep is this house from the front to the back? How many feet?
It's probably about 54,
Yeah.
49 to 54.
Why couldn't you come back with a plan that says, I'm going to build, it's 54 feet. I'm going to put 5 or 6 skylights, one next to the other, all the way across the top of this house. Now, and I'm going to put those skylights up to 28 feet. I can go above 28 feet with a skylight or not?
No.
I can't. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to put the skylights at 28 feet. Now I've got skylights almost across the whole top of my house. Am I violating any ordinance?
Not that I know of, and you're not any taller than the mansard roof that's at 28 feet
Okay.
also.
But what's happened to the amount of space I have between the floor of the second story and the top of the skylight?
Yeah, you're increasing the volume, but you're not increasing square footage. When you
Okay.
get into these sloped roof lines, you're also creating additional height because, on the sloped roof projects that I've done, you can take the ridge up to 28 feet, and the space below the ridge can be open to the rooms below it. So you're actually, with that plan, you've got this triangle, 25 feet to 28 feet. And with these open cathedral ceilings, you can take that all the way through the whole house. You've got the same thing.
So I hate to use the term ceiling, but what have you done with the ceiling in this skylight home all the way across?
Well, the ceiling is down where it's supposed to be, per the ordinance. We're not taking the ceiling up to 28 feet, if that's what you're asking.
So while the ceiling may be 25 feet, I've got skylights that are going 3 feet higher.
That's right.
So there's no change in the ceiling. There's no change then in what you're saying the ceiling height would be, even though it's really, I can look up and it's 28 feet.
Yeah, the ceiling height still complies with the ordinance, yes.
And that's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
If you can give me a minute here. Okay, under roof structures, this is, if you look on staff's report, it's page 62. Okay, it says roof structures. In all zones, roof structures may exceed, roof structures shall be erected above the height limits prescribed in this chapter, provided that no additional floor space is thereby created. Now, the way I look at it, when they say floor space, that's a two-dimensional concept. It's not a three-dimensional. It's not volume. They say you're not creating volume. It should just be a two-dimensional concept. I don't know how staff feels on that, but that's my opinion. Roof structures, it doesn't really identify skylights but in Chris Stevens' memo of 2004, it does say that is allowed. But anyway, I just wanted to make that distinction, or if you want to look at it like this, you do create extra volume by the skylights. But anyway, I just wanted to point it out. You can exceed the height limits provided no additional floor space is created. And
Thank you.
Do you find that there are other situations where a term of art that's used in architecture is not what's commonly used by lay people?
give you an example.
I'll give you an example. Could you just, if I gave you a piece of paper, or if you have a scratch piece of paper, draw me an eave.
When you say lay people, you're identifying
People who are not architects. People who are not architects.
people are not in the building department, people are not in the
No,
planning
no, no, no,
department,
no,
people
no.
are not in, I don't understand, lay people is, I'd have to ask my wife what an
Okay,
eve is.
here's my-
She wouldn't even know what an eve is.
Okay, here's what I'm trying to get at. Yeah, no, go ahead and show me what an eave is.
Eve is usually designated as underside of a roof overhang. Oh,
Yeah.
that would be good by the time I leave here. Anyway, just a quick sketch, an eave, that situation, you have an overhang, and the eave is considered the underside of a roof overhang. 'Cause they have what they call.
Okay,
eave
and as
vents.
they go-
You talk to, at times we need to ventilate the space. We put in what they call eave vents, which, anyway, but that's basically, the eave is the underside of the overhang.
Okay, and the eave is made up of what other?
Well,
What
you
else?
could be stucco, whatever. Just stucco, wood, it doesn't have to have anything. Yeah, it could be just open.
The thing that I'm getting at is your mansard roof and the difference of opinion that you have with what mansard roof is, and it seems to me to be a term of art from an architectural point of view versus from a planning point of view, where we're not into the nuts and bolts. But if that illustration of the different types of roofs, if that's what we're calling a mansard roof, then for purposes of planning, it's a mansard roof.
But it's not a roof. It's an attachment to an existing wall. It's a shingle treatment. A lot of times, you put shingles. You can. I don't think I brought it, but it's.
I think my point is that we're more concerned about the envelope rather than the actual construction details.
But this is called a roof structure. These are. Let me see here.
Incidentally,
Of all, excuse me, but all the examples that they show here, there's not one that follows that same reasoning where they're putting a decorative look on a wall and then they're calling it a roof structure. All these other ones are distinctly roofs. You've got a flat roof is a flat roof, barrel roof, that's clearly a roof. You pitched roof, hip roof, all these are actual roof structures. This one is not a roof structure. This is a decoration. You've got an existing house. You're putting something on the side of the house to give a little bit of an interest.
so if you were,
It's not a roof structure, which is what this document was drawn to show, roof structures that are acceptable.
so if you were to show a mansard roof, what would you sketch?
Well, going back,
What would you sketch in the same way that the sample structure profiles by roof type? What would you sketch?
Well, I had shown you. Let me see if I can dig it out here. It was on one of my drawings here.
Page 14. But I'm getting the side view. And I want what you think a mansard roof is for purposes on page 15. That would be a sample structure profile by roof type.
Okay, well, this is my version.
Again,
Now, what? And
I
then
was-
I'm going to. I was going to step.
okay, let me tell you what I'm after, though, so that you'll actually address my question instead of, so that we can communicate here. What I'm looking for is the other view of that, so that,
You ever? Other
so
view
that,
of,
look at your page 15. You say that mansard roof is not correct. Could you sketch one out for me that is correct from that point of view,
Oh,
not
from-
a side view?
you want me to sketch it over the one that currently says mansard roof? Okay.
It doesn't have to be on top of it. You could do it next to it so I can see what you're doing. Do you need a piece of paper?
Well, I'm looking for my pen. Here we go.
Okay. Can't see.
There we go. Okay. Get rid of this. This is just fluff. This is nothing. It has nothing to do with roof structure. A mansard roof. Okay, you can't really show it properly in a front view. It has to be looked in a cross-section type of application. Similar to the drawing I just put on, you'd have a parapet wall, and you would have the roof going down like so, and then on the other side, you would have just a duplicate of it. But that's in essence, in a cross-section view, what it would look like.
So for purposes of our ordinance, could you have a mansard roofed structure with a ceiling height and then on top of that a parapet wall with a skylight?
One more time.
How much higher can you go?
With what? This is 8. This is at 28 feet.
Uh-huh.
Your skylight, if you had a skylight, that would top out at 28 feet. So, establishing structures, the structure height is considered top of the mansard or top of parapet, which is at 28 feet.
So you couldn't have another parapet on top of your mansard-shaped roof?
I don't know how. You would be exceeding the 28-foot height.
Got it. Thank you. Incidentally, about the eave,
Yeah.
could you draw the underside of just the, if you were making it of wood, how there's more detail to it?
Chair Bartels, given the complexity of these drawings and the number of drawings that Mr. Phillips is doing, I think it would be appropriate for each one of those drawings to be entered into the record as an exhibit. Otherwise, no one listening to this record will know anything of what anybody is saying. So without the pictures and the identification, I would suggest that you not proceed any further until that is done, so that we have a very clear order of what we have before us.
Just what I think we'll do is allow the line of questioning to complete, and then Walt, if it's okay, to receive your drawings and we can exhibit
Drawings
them
are
in.
terrible, but if you want to...
Oh.
Okay, this is...
Thank you.
It's rough, but you can see what I'm talking about. An eave that would have wood underneath it, you would have this would be the ends, these would be what they call basically the rafter tails. This is your fascia board. This is blocking between the rafters. And you see this with the squiggly line, that's usually where your shiplap would be, or your tongue and groove would be located. And
Okay,
that
the reason
whole-
why-
that whole assembly there is considered an eave.
The reason why I ask is because a layperson would think that there was no difference between a fascia board and a rafter and an eave. Those were terms of art that most people, lay people, are not familiar with, and they look more at the whole. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If we could get those various drawings and
Should I initial them, or?
You don't need to initial them. They're just going to come into the record so that as you go through.
I don't think I would want to initial them, but you could have them. Do I turn them into something?
I'm sorry, to the clerk here. Commissioner Rodriguez?
Yeah. I'm not quite sure where to start.
Then let's, in that moment, let's take a short break so you can gather your thoughts and others can be where they need to be for a moment.
Thank you.
5 minutes.
Okay.
Commissioner Rodriguez? Walt, you're up.
Hello, it's finally nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you from neighbors throughout the area as they've gone about building, doing remodels and stuff, and then more recently when these issues of codes and code interpretation on the beach and stuff like that. I heard a rumor that you were being consulted on to interpret the codes, LZO. The explanation this morning by Mr. Ish, I guess, kind of puts that in proper perspective for me. But it goes to the whole issue, I guess, that we're talking about here today. I'm curious. So, what's the datum point on this house?
Well, the finished floor is dictated by flood control.
Yeah.
Then we're allowed to go to the top of the parapet wall, 28 feet.
And so what is that point above the midpoint of the street in relation?
Above the midpoint of the street?
In relation to grade.
Well, they used to not.
I know it's
the prop in the past. They would tell us to measure from high point of the street in front of the house, measure up 12 to 15 and 16 inches above that, and that's where our finished floor would be. Okay, and then from there we would go up to the top. Now it's just quite a bit more complicated. We need to get a surveyor. The surveyor needs to shoot perimeter elevations up and down the street. You have to determine where the spill point of this like pool area is going to spill out and run off. So in some cases it may be 12 inches above the center line, but if you get into some of the side streets like over Silver Strand where you hit the big dip between Island View and Ocean Drive, you could be building the finished floor up 30 inches above the center line of the street in front of your house. It's really
so that hasn't been done on this parcel yet until demolition occurs? Is that what you're saying?
Silver Strand, the side streets are
No,
kind of a
I'm
major problem.
speaking about the subject parcel here today.
Yeah, this is not a problem. It's going to be anywhere from 12 to 16 inches above.
So that hasn't been identified yet?
No.
Okay, I was wondering because I didn't see any indication of that on the drawings, symbolism to show what the datum point was.
Yeah.
What's the degree of excavation is going to occur to make this basement home happen? Volume?
Oh, we're just scraping the old house off. The elevations are probably pretty close from where the existing driveway is. So as far as moving sand, I don't think we'll be moving that much sand at all. Waste management has been forcing upon us to use whatever sand we can as backfills on the retaining wall areas, the raised basement plans. So we use quite a bit of sand just in backfilling that structure. It's just not a lot of sand that goes out. Now you have other projects like on the oceanfront of Silver Strand where the existing homes are up on a big mound of sand and they have to be dropped down. And in those cases, you're going to be moving a bit of sand, but not in this particular case.
In those cases, then it would take approval and review by Public Works and permit by Public Works for excavation.
Yeah.
Okay. If we can hold it to the subject property here, we can move right along. The intent then is to build a basement home here, as the drawings indicate.
Yes.
And create a 3-foot build-up around the perimeter to accommodate that.
Correct.
Correct. And so the starting point for purposes of measurement, once that datum point is identified, will be the finished floor of the garage, and measure upward vertically from there.
It's actually the finished floor of what they call the basement.
Or basement.
The floor of the garage is usually 6 inches below that.
It seems. Okay. It seems to me, and I thought I had a memorandum that we got in a staff report that identified, might be that 92 memorandum that was done by Mr. Turner that identified the finish, the starting point, or it was a finish of the floor of the garage. Obviously, that preceded basement homes, but
yeah, the garage floor has always been
the starting
out
point.
of that starting point. Flood control tells us that the finished floor, the datum that they give us is the finished floor of the basement or the first floor. doesn't relate to the garage at all. They say as a accessory note, garage should be 5.5, 6 inches below the living area of the house.
So if the proposed construction, as it appears to be going, is going to have a basement garage, and the first floor technically then is above the garage, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's a curve. Usually you want separation. Good construction practice, you always want your garage below the level of the first floor. So there's always,
Right.
if you go through homes, there's always that step from the garage up into the house.
Right. So what we're talking about then is about 3 feet above the garage floor,
Yes, it's
as the
approximate.
first floor,
No,
as the start of the first floor, entry
No.
into the house, because that's where the retaining wall is going to come up to, isn't it? The build up.
are you talking specifically about this plan?
Well, I'm
And
referring to these drawings.
Okay, well, let me kind of explain it. Hopefully, you have the garage level. Garage level is 6 inches below where Public Works tells us to build the first level of our house. Okay. Above the first level of the house, we're building up the perimeter sidewalks somewhere from 30 inches to 3 feet. So you've got, a 3-foot variation between the raised sidewalk outside the perimeter of the house and the slab of the first floor.
Okay. Okay. And that'll be your starting point then.
Yeah, the measuring point doesn't have anything to do with the
Garage
outside
floor.
perimeter sidewalk or the floor of the garage. It has to do with the concrete floor of the first level.
Okay. Everything I've read in the codes, and I glanced at some of the excerpts that were cited as far as the California Coastal Act and definitions, how they were used and how they were cited. And I looked at obviously read and have a copy of the local zoning ordinance, Ventura County's local zoning ordinances. And the issue of roofs and definition of roofs is a finished covering, if you will, as I read it. And the codes talk about maximum roof heights as a finish, not a starting point to accommodate a ceiling underneath. I mean, the ceiling is defined as a finished space between the finished floor and the finished ceiling. And that's internal. And I can understand where confusion may have come in because of the work that was done by you administration on behalf of others in the county to come up with some compromise on this issue of building height as it relates to 25 feet. And obviously the evolution of building and building design and materials have allowed some additional creativity there to where we are now. The problem I'm having is and I guess it starts with Mr. Stevens' initial memo in '04, because the problem had already been identified and confusion had already begun to occur as I hear things and I read the staff report. And that effort was made to try to clarify what the codes say. Just as a point of reference, I'm a retired county employee, an agency of 1,500 people approximately, was tasked with and is tasked with enforcement of laws, codes, and ordinances, both state and local and federal. And within that organization, we have policies and procedures that are drafted, codified, and reviewed by council and implemented, and staff is trained on them. And so when the issue comes up, there's a reference point. That's not the case, obviously, in this situation. And as things have evolved, there have been a couple of documents manufactured internally for staff's benefit and the benefit of applicants as well, I suppose, in trying to understand the interpretation. It's in my opinion, it's unfortunate that the term ceiling was used I guess, indiscriminately with the term roofing. I mean, if we were talking avionics, it's real clear. When FAA says you have a sea length 25 feet or 28 feet, that doesn't mean 28 feet plus another 3, or that doesn't mean 28 feet plus another 18 inches. It's real clear. But we're not talking avionics here. But I think the code was trying to be clear also on what originally was meant and intended. Separate.
Can I say one item?
Certainly.
Okay, the Saperstein project, the top of the roof,
Uh-huh.
the curved roof is where you showed building height compliance.
Mm-hmm.
The question comes up, well, what do you do underneath that? What you do underneath it doesn't have anything to do with the building height. It's totally separate. Okay, and then that's why that one section, okay, getting back to my example though, building height, the building height compliance by showing the top of the mansard roof to not exceed 28 feet. Okay, you've now met the requirements of building height. You can't have on a flat mansard, a mansard roof and whatever, you can't have multiple points of references. You have one reference, and in this project, it's the top of the mansard roof. Okay, so once you show compliance there, then you back off to that one section of the code. Which is again 8175-3.13-C. It says, in no case shall the finished height of an exterior wall running parallel to the main ridge line or pitched or hip roof exceed the finished height of 25 feet. Now, again, the finished height of an exterior wall cannot exceed 25 feet. We're saying top of double plate is the top of the wall. We're showing compliance on height of the building to the top of the mansard, but now somebody's got to step back and say, well, what happens behind the mansard?
We're talking the double plates. Double plate has to be below the roof, the finished roof line.
But again,
and what we're doing here, seems to me, is we're taking that double plate up to the roof, to the maximum or almost maximum roof line, and then continuing from there, anywhere from whatever the thickness of the roof requirements are to accommodate the covering.
But in the past, what they're saying, once you show compliance with the building height, the 28 feet, the 25 feet, which is in that in the matrix,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't really apply here because you already show that your building meets the height requirements. And all this section I just recited is how you go about establishing what's behind that. Similar to Saperstein, they show compliance with the dome roof, and they said with the Saperstein project, their ceiling could be 25 feet under that dome roof. Similar to these zone clearances, you look at these zone clearances we looked at. Okay, talking points. Okay, look at page 18. My talking points. This was a zone clearance. It's probably not more than 3 months old, 4 months old. Okay, let me put it on this folder here. How do I turn this on? Okay. This was put in for some reason. Maximum ceiling height 25 feet. Why is this any different than what I have? I've got maximum ceiling height of 25 feet. I've got a sloped roof above that 25-foot ceiling with a ridge line that runs parallel with exterior walls. There's no difference. And this is an approved zone clearance. We're in plan check right now.
Just, this is Nancy Francis. This roof is an example of a pitched roof. and it was shown in one of those examples. I understand it's one of those examples you take exception with in the drawings that have been, our draft for the determination that we're trying to put together. But in analyzing this would have been analyzed as a pitched roof.
Okay, getting back to my example, this is what I went over with John Drake, on John Drake's plan, Dan Clemens, and with you, Nancy, and with Chris Stevens.
For reference, we're looking at the Drake plan at this point.
Okay, we have 25 feet from the center to the ceiling joist. We have a ridge line. This is where, working with staff, Dan Clemens said, Walt, we've got to create more of a slope. Now, in my clients, if I bring the slope up higher, is that then considered a sloping roof? I don't know.
If I could jump in here for a second. We are experiencing the beach right here in this hearing, and I would take us back for a moment to the fact that we have a very specific appeal, and we have illuminated, I think, hopefully for everyone, the issue that we keep running up against the beach. So I don't want to step on this testimony. At the same time, I don't want to I feel like we have gone far afield from the actual appeal that's before us for the purposes of this dialogue. I think that, and we are beginning to argue something that is not before us specifically on this appeal. And council definitely have an opinion here, but for the purposes of what this commission needs to determine today, I think we have plenty of information, and I think that we are this is not what's before us at this moment. So if this dialogue, I think we all note this dialogue, but I think I want to make sure that Commissioner Rodriguez works through the rest of his questions so that we can get to the sticking point of what we are actually hearing as an appeal. So I would like to terminate this conversation at this point and get back to the commissioner's questions.
Okay. Thank you. Well, those are the issues that I had concerning that issue of 25 feet in the ceiling versus roof. And it's more than semantical. I think it's by definition what is one and what is not, and what is the other. And there's two distinct differences between the meaning of both words, based on what I've read, in my opinion. The other issue, I guess, has to do with the skylight, or the staircase that functions with the skylight. In order to accommodate that, to properly exit onto that deck, it requires additional space that cannot be accommodated, as I understand, without the use of that skylight. Is that kind of that's the way I understood it. But in an effort to keep it at the 28 feet, I mean, you just can't do both, and without impeding on that requirement for skylight and for the door that goes there. Is that? I think that's the way I interpreted what staff was trying to, what staff provided us. And that's basically your argument, as I hear it, that it can accommodate and it doesn't create additional volume. But the only reason for that those skylights is to accommodate that doorway, thereby create additional volume. And the code says you shall not increase volume.
The skylight by itself is a permitted use. It says in the code, I can create skylights to create the volume. The volume's already there.
Yeah.
Like, if I didn't have the staircase, there would be no issue here?
All right.
Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying if the skylight was there flat, and yeah, the staircase wasn't
So
there, there would be no issue there.
Okay, so
The reason,
skylight's there, and there's no staircase, there wouldn't be any issue with this roof line, or with this access to the sun deck.
May I say something about the skylights issue? As going back to Chris's 2004 memo and his Area B, where he's talking about, the code talks about roof structures. We're using the word roof structure to talk about the stuff in B, but actually roof structures, the only thing we talk about are antennas and flagpoles and things like that. And so Area B was an attempt by Chris to describe what could go into this 25-foot area. And when he talks about things like stairways, tanks, ventilating fans, firewalls, parapet walls, and skylights, we're talking about essentially items that are not integral to the structure of the building, can be removed. You take that other little skylight out, the ceiling is not going to fall down. But in the skylight that we're talking about right here, it has to be constructed and integrated into the design, of the roof. If it went away, you would be open to the elements at that end of the house, essentially, because it is not a accessory sort of a structure that you need. It is part of the design of the roof. You can't separate it from the roof without disrupting the integrity of the roof. That's
okay.
Integrity.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that? This roof structure, this skylight that we're putting here is on its own. We frame around and create an opening. The opening's there. We put a skylight on top of it. Doesn't have anything to do with the structure of the house, doesn't have to do with the seismic issues, doesn't have anything to do with load bearing. It's just by itself. It's just like a 3x3 skylight. You got an opening, you put it down on the opening. This one just happens to be a little bigger than what you normally would expect, but it's still the same thing. It's not an integral part of the structural integrity of the house.
It creates the roof profile in this location. I mean, it is the roof profile of the skylight.
Yeah, but it's behind the mansard roof.
That's it.
Excuse me, a question on that. Does that skylight have to be open for someone to safely exit onto the deck?
No.
To have sufficient or the required head clearance space?
Does the skylight create the head space?
No, I'm asking if in order to exit onto that deck from the master bedroom up those stairs, you have to raise that skylight to exit the building, exit the bedroom onto the deck.
To raise the skylight? No.
It's like a window. You have to open
no.
the window in order to get out onto the deck.
No.
Is what I'm asking.
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Any other questions? Thank you.
What?
Is there any additional testimony from the appellant? Okay. I have no other speaker cards. So it's time for the appellant's rebuttal. All right. Then at this point, I will close the public hearing, and
I believe you have closing comments.
I apologize, you're right. Reopen closing comments by staff.
Well, it certainly seems we have a lot to answer for. Talking, having heard Mr. Phillips run through all of those claims, and I don't know to what extent you want me to respond to each of his talking points. In fact, especially as involves previous designs, I would be at a disadvantage not being able to have my own files available to me to
Nancy, if I could,
dates and blah, blah, blah.
Okay, hold on for 1 second. Let's talk just a moment among the commission. It is my view that if there are specific questions of staff over one of those things, it would be appropriate to have that dialogue. But for me, it's not pertinent to the dialogue that we need to have about this appeal right now. Does anybody have?
I guess specifically, what is the exterior wall, and is that 25 feet?
Very interesting point. I do think I'm going to step down so I can draw another picture. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other specifics, Commissioner Molitor, Commissioner Rodriguez? I think specific to talking points, there will be additional dialogue.
No, just talking points.
Want to use one of the drawings that I've already made that may be faster. I think there's more similarities here between the Saperstein appeal and this appeal than may originally present themselves. In the case, okay, this is over here. This is the Saperstein one. With your commission determined
Draw neatly. It's going in the record.
was that the
Put
finished
his name on it and make him cringe.
put little faces on it. It was 25 feet. That's what your commission determined, that the finished wall was 25 feet. Anything above 25 feet was something else. Was it a roof? Was it a parapet? Was it a roof structure? Was it the housing for the elevator? What was it? And in the case of the Sapersteins, what they had done, is bring it up to 28 feet and then had this barrel, which then did provide them with this space in here, which your commission said, no, the finished wall is at 25 feet, and at 25 feet, that is the building height, the roof, if we will, the building height. So that then anything above that 25 feet has to fall into a different category. And so in this case, they made that category a parapet. They designed it to make it a parapet. In the instant case in front of us, again, we have this finished wall at 25 feet. And then in this case, the applicant has taken up by a header, architectural terms, I'm very sorry, a structure, a support for the skylight that then creates this additional space. Not dissimilar to what happened over here with the appeal that you already heard. And that is really sort of is the crux of it. Yeah, you're right. He did show other kinds of skylights, but this other skylight, you had the roof going along, and then you just had this little, thing that was the skylight. Well, that's awful. But that, and it could have been an elevator shaft, or it could have been some other piece of equipment that we said was appropriated in here. But it doesn't really, it provides you additional light and air, but it doesn't really add to your usable space in the same way that this barrel ceiling, barrel roof would have done over here, or this skylight does in this particular case.
How's that different from a shed roof?
Well, what he's proposing here, it's not the entire structure, and it does have this parapet wall, and it's, that's probably beyond maybe I'll say. It's not it's not a whole shed, a shed structure. My understanding, the entire shed's got that kind of slant to it, which was shown in one of his previous examples, where the entire roof was, went from one corner up down to another corner lower. Just a little portion of the house.
One thing that caught my eye was this terminology issue, and how we got around having to have 2 staircases for a 3-story is to not call it 3 stories. And by calling it a skylight, it's not a roof structure. It's not a roof. And it seems to be playing with terminology because
It is playing with terminology,
Yeah.
quite frankly, because in the example of the basement houses, the intent of Keith Turner's memo in 92 was to say, we don't care what you call the levels of these structures. You can call them anything you want. You can call it a basement for the planning purposes. We're starting at the datum point and we're going up 25 feet. That's what we're doing. And what you can get inside that, you can call it whatever you want. But the building department, it makes a big difference as to whether it's a basement or a first floor or second floor. So when we started seeing these plans labeled basement, first and second, we went back to the designers and architects and said, no, don't do, you don't need to do that first. Call it garage. That's what it is. But we just want to see where's the flood control datum point or the 12 inches above the crown of the adjacent road and measure up from there. And so that is a difficulty between language that planners may use and what the building code may use. If calling it a basement allowed the removal of an exterior stairway or a second staircase, well, that was an issue really between the designers and the building and safety. That wasn't our issue to enforce.
and what goes on behind a parapet doesn't have any impact. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I mean, impact, I'm not sure what the impact would be visually. It probably doesn't have an impact because you will not, the roof height, like we saw, it'll be essentially, you'll look at a 28-foot building.
Have you been in the subject property?
I've not been on the subject property. I've been by it, but not on it.
I strongly disagree with this. What happens behind the parapet doesn't have any impact because it does on privacy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, from the other structures that are also, around you. And, that is why there's a choice. I mean, some people make solid parapets, some people make glass parapets, some have a combination of both, some have roof decks. I mean, yes, it does matter. I mean, but we only regulate the structures that are allowed above 25 feet, but below 28 feet.
And then, do you agree that there has been a change in interpretation, or
Well, I'll tell
I mean,
you,
does Chris Stevens have the ability to change to make new rules, or does it have to go to the board and
well, to
come
change
back?
the code
Yeah.
requires the board, ultimately your commission and the board's approval to change the code. But like a lot of other, standards that exist, some of them are certainly subject to interpretation. And as was demonstrated in the Saperstein case, the way that the counterstaff was interpreting this finished height of the wall at 25 feet was different than what your commission told us really was the way it ought to be interpreted, which is 25 feet, you've got a roof. That's the building.
And I come back to these drawings that show me essentially a 28-foot exterior wall in order to hold up what's essentially the roof, which in this case is a skylight.
The purpose really of a lot of these memos is just truly to try to provide clarity. And I will tell you that I've been involved in coastal development for a long time, that I have learned a great deal, not only with all of the projects, frankly, that Walt has presented to you in terms of our difficulty and the many, we have the variables of the plans as they are presented to us by various designers. Some will show clearly the height. We had one come in yesterday that all the dimensions were given in elevation above sea level. That's not going to help me. I need feet. Give me feet on these things. You have somebody else who comes in who only dimensions on the first set, the first sheet, and doesn't give you dimensions anyplace else. You've got people who are going to show you the construction details, even though, we see these little squiggly lines. We don't know really what they mean. I mean, so, and I'm sure Kim has already mentioned to you, there's a huge undertaking right now to try to bring more consistency and conformity to plans that we receive, and then our ability to be able to review them in a consistent fashion. Because just when you think you've seen it all, somebody comes in and Saperstein was an incredible example because it was the way their architect demonstrated at the lower level how the house was going to be constructed by showing us sort of a CAD drawing, sort of a 3D drawing of what the structure would look like. And they just go, well, what have we been doing on all these other houses? We realized that the plans we were seeing didn't show us this built-up area around, the house because they didn't show it. And I mean, I suppose if we had been architecturally savvy enough to understand it, we would have questioned it. But one plan comes in, and all of a sudden you go, "My God, what have we been doing on all of these other plans?" So we're always learning, and we try to apply what we learn, and we try not to perpetuate our errors once we believe we have discovered them.
Besides elevator shafts and the skylights that are the ones that we commonly think of, what else is allowed greater than the 28 feet?
No, 28 feet is easy. It's only weather vanes, because what you just described is not above 28 feet. The shafts cannot go above 28 feet. The skylights cannot go above 28 feet.
What can?
Stairwells that come up, you come up from inside the house, and rather than just having a trap door in your roof, sometimes people will have a staircase that comes up onto the roof with a little cover over it. Those railings that
Can be over 28?
No.
Okay, what can be over 28?
Weather vanes, flagpoles, antennas. What?
Chimneys?
Thank you. I think that's it. That's it.
I want to jump in here if I can, just for a minute to put hopefully some clarity to what the planning department is looking for on this appeal, and just from this point forward. We are hoping to put together this final memo to train the staff, train the counter staff, management, and everybody that does business in the beach area. So we want clarity on this. It looks like we have clarity with what happens under 25 feet and what happens over 28 feet. It's this 3 feet that we seem to be constantly debating. And then once we think that we have it down, if it says this is what you need to do under a main ridge line, then somebody builds a ridge line that's less than half of the house. Then we have to step down and say, all right, well, is a main ridge line under 50%, or do you have to have 51% being a main ridge line? Then they go back and they put, 50% plus 1 foot, and that's their main ridge line. Then they get a pitch. I mean, it's a continual it's a continual challenge for the planning department to deal with these. And so it's a 3-foot issue that we're looking at now. And, in Chris's memo, and then his memo to me interpreting his original memo, what he clearly says to me is, nowhere in the memo or attached figure does it state or suggest that a rafter or other structural elements needed to support a ceiling or roof may be constructed above 25 feet. That seems easy to me. That seems if we say 25 feet, that's it, and we need to make some interpretations. And then all of a sudden we see 25 feet and then a double plate. And then all of a sudden the double plate is the new rule. That probably, if I went back and looked at the last 50 plans, we would probably only see that on the last 10. So it's this constant inching up of the ordinance until, it gets out of control. There's only 3 feet to deal with, and we're already inching into this 18-inch territory. I mean, 25 feet should be 25 feet, and that's what we're looking at for some clarity here. You get 25 feet to the top of the wall. Here's what you get in that 3 feet, and we really know what happens under 25 or over 25.
And again, go back to the planning, the reason for, what is the legitimate purpose that the county should care? I think that the beach is for all to enjoy, not just the property owners, but when I ride my bike, I would like glimpses of the ocean. Also, when I'm in one of these properties, I want to have my view. And when I'm at the ocean, I'm actually at the water's edge, I don't ordinarily look back. I'm looking out. So what's the purpose? I mean, why is the county messing in their business?
I guess this goes back to probably, planning and zoning 101. I'm not sure there's anything magic about the number 25 or the number 28, but it is the standard, and certainly we've heard discussion about, from the design community, how that figure got into our code, and it was supported and approved by the board. It was approved by the Coastal Commission. So, and it is not inconsistent with housing heights in other parts of the county. It's not dissimilar from that. But at the beach, where you have these very small lots, it certainly does, look, when you get to the edges of these building envelopes, like a whole lot. So there isn't anything specifically magical about those numbers, except that that's what the law is right now. If the law should change, then we would enforce something else. But really, we see our job right now is, to the very best extent that we can, implement the provisions of the ordinance as they exist, because then it provides dependability and predictability to the people who are buying and building and thinking about purchasing at the beach. They understand there are standards, and they understand that the county is enforcing and implementing those standards. So I think it's mostly a level of dependability and predictability at this point.
Thank you.
Just a fast question, Nancy. We're dealing with the county, but as I come up the coast, I'm into the cities. Does the city of Ventura, they have to go by the Coastal Commission regulations, right? Is the city of Ventura's buildings and a city of Oxnard's buildings on the beach similar to our county requirements? Maybe the architect would know that.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about Oxnard, because I do know more about Oxnard, frankly, than Ventura. But it's not so much implementing what the Coastal Commission says, because their language, is the overarching, is rather general. But they get specific to each jurisdiction when the Coastal Commission reviews a county or city's proposed local coastal plan. And there is a certain amount of variation as between jurisdictions, depending on their own particular worldview or ocean view, as to what they would like to see in their city. And if it passes muster with the Coastal Commission, it doesn't require that every jurisdiction along the coast have the exact same rules. One of the interesting departures I notice, and I spend time down at Mandalay Beach, and when you walk through the city's beachfront streets, what you notice is all of the houses are built on pilings. You have no such thing as a basement house. The driveways are all slanted upward because they set their elevation such that you can't be right on the sand, and so that you can, on most houses, you can take a good look right underneath the house all the way across. That's not a convention in the county where we have allowed things to be at grade or even below grade. So it's a different design there.
If we go up the coast, up to the Rincon area within the county, it's the same.
It's the same as this place.
As Silver Strand.
But we have two beach zones. We have what's called the RBH, which is Residential Beach Harbor, and that's Silver Strand and Hollywood Beach. On the north coast and on the very south coast, we have what we call the RB, which is Residential Beach. And the standards, while they're largely the same, have some specific distinctions. That section of the code we've been discussing so much all day, 3.13, is specific to the RB and the RBH zone, which makes it sort of different from the other coastal zones. But even within that, there are a few distinctions, very minor.
Thank you.
No, I'm fine with your comments.
Thank you, Nancy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now I would close the public hearing. We have many exhibits. I want to make sure, have all of the drawings been... Thank you. County Council, do you have any comments at this point in terms of framing, or should the Commission do some deliberation and then seek guidance if we go too far afield.
I think it'd be better if you deliberate and try to formulate a motion rather than for me to step in at this point in time and articulate something.
If I could call the Commission's attention to page 38 of the packet, which is page 1 of this staff report. There are 3 specific grounds of appeal, and Commissioner Dukas, you really took on grounds number 2 in your discussion of wall versus other. And I guess I would ask the Commission, is there someone who wants to take a shot at framing a motion?
Presently, I would recommend to deny the appeal because I think it's clear that that skylight functions as a roof. And these generic terms, roof, ceiling, double plate, is frankly today's the first day that I've heard that term. So it's not something that was in my thought processes at all when we were grappling with how high can we go. And I think for reasons of just having a dependable, supportable standard that they helped draft, that 25 feet should be it. And I am positive that with the incredible talent and creativity, that whatever you end up building will be beautiful and an asset to the community and enjoyed by whoever lives there.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
I have a second from Commissioner Rodriguez. Is there discussion? Just a comment. I think it's clear that some of the terms of art might come out of our current dialogue. And my other comment is that we tend to fix things by finagling them, and as a result, that means that I'm never sure when an approval is an approval or design is design. And I too have seen spectacular houses, and it's a personal thing, but I always get concerned when cars begin to live on the beach. And when we talk about building envelope, we require a 2-car garage minimum, and that means that the building envelope starts outside the largest room of the house. And when I go to the beach, I like the beach, not necessarily the fact that a bunch of cars live at the beach. So I know it's a separate issue, but I appreciate the 25 feet. So, call a question. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Thank you. Oh, yeah, you can appeal within 10 days. It's the other issue about planning. If there's a decision, it's appealable. Now we have a decision. Discussion? Report by the planning director?
Okay, we have a few pieces of good news going on. We hired a new planning RMA tech that started this Monday, I believe, and we have another RMA tech coming on board that's starting next Monday. So we're very, very happy about that. Hopefully fill some of these vacancies. The zoning enforcement manager position, we should start interviewing for those in the next week or so. I could not be more excited about that. let's see, the APA. Is anybody going to the APA conference, the American Planning Association conference in Hollywood this year, the state conference?
Yeah, I haven't heard about it.
Oh, it is September 21st through the 24th. It's going to be in Hollywood this year. All of the planning managers are going to attend both the Monday and Tuesday session, and a majority of the staff, and I believe almost all of the permit planners here, are going to attend the Monday session, which is really good news for us. I can give you some information on it, or
Is
some
that,
information
maybe
on
that's
it.
the information we're giving us today? We got 3 envelopes? No, it's not that? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not the Planning Commission conference, it's the American Planning Association conference.
Which, right.
Okay.
Yeah,
If you're interested in attending that, yeah, let me know.
Good. Well, can you email me the information?
Sure.
Okay.
And let's see, just some happenings that are going on at the board. We heard the Amadei appeal last week, and that appeal for their wedding for the Amadeis has been appealed to the board, so we're moving forward, setting a tentative board date, I think, for either the 7th or the 14th of October. That's as soon as we can get on their agenda. There's some very fun things coming up on your agenda, the Piru Area Plan, which we're very excited about. The long-awaited update of the Piru Area Plan is coming your way on September 25th, and the even longer-awaited Modification 7 to the St. Joseph's Health, which was an actual SOAR vote, is coming to you on October 2nd, and a very important appeal on October the 9th. So hopefully we're going to have a full Planning Commission agenda. I don't know if we've already have your dates for those dates. Do you know if you're all going to be in attendance for those? Yes, okay, those are going to be some very important dates coming up. And that's what I have. Anything for me?
Just, if I may, trailing on your comments and dates, that sounds like 3 consecutive Thursdays. We plan to meet. Okay. I'll verify that. Can I speak to regarding my thoughts and comments about this issue of the memorandum and what in the direction internally I would hope that you guys go
Sure.
as you sit down. I as I said, I come from an occupation that has formalized policies and procedures based on laws, guidelines, and other state and federal mandates, and those policies and procedures are put together by internal committee with review and assistance of legal counsel to make sure they pass muster. And once that's done, a training cycle begins so that everybody on board is up to speed, and it has a reference point that's defendable. And I understand that as time goes and these regulations get stale, we have to submit or modify with short-term memorandum for clarification until we can update the policy and procedure. I would hope that in the future, when this happens, for the benefit of staff's edification, that before it's distributed, it's at least passed by legal oversight to make sure the terminology is consistent with the codes and the laws, so that we don't have this confusion and intermixing of terms, roof versus ceilings, and it's clear, and we can refer to definitions and everybody understands. Because as staff transitions, and we all know all about transitional staffs, that interpretation, unless it's codified in some sort of policy and procedure, changes with the person that sits in that chair this month and next month and beyond that. I mean, I was so surprised when I heard that we're doing one thing on one side of the street versus the other side of the street, and that staff didn't know about it until they went to the counter zoning officer and asked how they were doing it. And I appreciate, and don't take my comments, I don't mean to be critical, but because I really appreciate what you're doing, and what RMA is trying to do now is clean up something that's had a lot of problems for a long, long time. But when I heard and read that the agency has departments within it that aren't talking to each other and are just passing passing it from one office to the next to clarify. I was glad to see that it appears to be the intent to create a committee situation so when these plans come in, there's a representative from each of those departments. They can look at them and come together and speed up the process. That obviously these plan submittals are getting bogged down through. So I would hope that that ideally, if something could be codified into policy and procedures, that everybody could know were there and use as a reference that's defendable, that would be the ideal way to go, because Chris's meaning, I think, was certainly well intended, but the result is it's created confusion, and which created the hole that everybody's trying to go through now under the definition of creative design. I think we need to get back into what the code says, or change the code to accommodate today's times. That's all. Thank you.
And I agree with you. I couldn't agree more on a couple of different fronts. One of them is the Lean Six Sigma and the Get to Excellence plan, which we are presenting to the board, and that's just very, very exciting, I think, for all county agencies, especially planning, who is the hub of the good news and the bad news to the applicant. So we're very excited about that process. And also on this, and we have been waiting to have this meeting to set what I hope are more back to basic standards on measuring height at the beach. And really what we want to present to the applicants and the permit expediters and to the developers is we really only want to see the terms that are in our ordinance on their plans. Because when they get to the building department, they may use their other building terms, but we really only want to use the terms of art in our ordinance. So once we heard that you have agreed with that today, then we're going to go forward with that and say this is how you need to submit plans for building height in the RB and the RBH zone, and we're going to immediately conduct some training on that, much needed training.
All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you.